me bring in a guest. Coming live from no longer Maine. He is no longer the only black person. He is now in a sea of Negroes in Virginia. Marcus from the Left Flank Vets.
Women through all these Negroes. What's up? What's up? What's up? Happy to be back.
Does it feel different? You walk down the street and do you just like hug random black people?
Like, I mean, honestly, it's like I do feel like less people are like straight up looking at me. Like that is like a real, like it's a real thing, you know, because you can feel
a little different.
Or like they're like just or not even paying attention to me, you know, just it's just fine. So, yeah, although it's humid as fuck, that's one thing that was like, yeah, this is
because you're near DC, right?
Yeah, just a stone's throw out of DC. Just right past. You take a left at Raytheon Acres, go past Eliteville, and yeah, we're on the other side.
You can go have coffee and scones with Brianna Joy Gray.
Yeah, we could. And actually, I watched the show. I didn't get to see the behind the scenes half, but no, you guys had good talk.
I was this close to asking if you wanted to come on, but I know you do a stream that day, and I was like, oh no.
Yeah, no. And this past week, or like the past 2 weeks, like I've just kind of been hell moving and all that shit. But we good now. We good.
Kuba Rizneski is ridiculous. Also, he is our favorite professor from the land of Missouri. Mean Gene Bajlan.
Guten Morgen, meine Damen und Herren. That's all my German I think I'm going to bust out today.
I'm still on 99 von Luft balloons, man.
Yeah. I only got Sprechen Sie Deutsch.
Sprechen Sie Deutsch. And I don't know. Ich möchte eine Käsekuchen. I'd like a cheesecake. Very important German phrases.
Is Das Boot? Can I that's another one?
He's gonna yell that out. He's gonna,
Das Boot.
Just gonna go to Berlin and start yelling out Das Boot. Don't
do that.
Don't do that. They're sensitive about the boots.
Might get fucked up.
Is Fraulein? Do people still say Fraulein in German?
I think that's like I think that's a little bit condescending.
Is it?
As far as I know, I think it. Frau and Herr. It's I'm not sure if the old-fashioned. That's what Kuba says.
I really hope the German. I think the German guests.
They're definitely cursing out.
Yeah, well, they came on. They should do their best Western or
American
accent.
And I want to just address something.
I was told there would be Germans here. Where are the Germans?
I want to address something, by the way, in the that people have been asking me. People have been asking me. They were like, "You guys don't have enough women on the show," and I just want to say, we are all working on it. But it is difficult to get women to
enjoy great.
No. I've said numerous times. Do you know how hard it is to get a woman on the show? Because the first instinct is, look who slid into my DMs. It's like, I'm trying to ask.
Well, it's not like that. Women get abuse like 10 times more than men when it comes to this kind of thing. And like whatever one thinks of Brianna Jagroy, she gets a lot of heat, which I don't think male podcasters will get. So I just wanted to address that point. A lot of people have been asking me about the lack of women on the show. We are definitely working on it.
A lot of people like who?
I've had like a couple of people DM me. And Jason's had some people DM me.
Okay, when you say people, okay, let me clarify.
Bring in our guests. We can't. This is an off-air.
We want us to have female guests or co-hosts.
Guests.
Yes.
Oh, we try. We always try.
Why are you getting defensive? This is not this defensive. It has to be off-air defensive. You gotta be common. Like, yes, we try.
We're trying.
Billy did real quick. We tried. Just give him to Billy D. You're not gonna give me the bit. There you go. That's all you need. Okay. Coming from the deep state, somewhere in a bunker in British Columbia. I don't say his name on this stream, but on the audio only, I always try because I don't want him to look at me like this when I say it wrong. Deep State Cuba.
We can't hear Deep State Cuba.
Oh, did the Deep State get him? That's fucked up. He put a tie on and everything.
The Deep State got Deep State Cuba.
Oh, man. The look on his face right now looks like he's just sabotaging everybody's computer.
Double DS for the Cuba. The double Deep State.
Oh, no.
Well, Gene, let's bring in our guest from Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's put Cuba in the corner. Let him work himself out.
So I'm going to bring them both in at the same time. Coming all the way from, I believe they're in Berlin, Germany. Nadim and Daniel of 99 Zu Eins.
Hello. May I just do the? There you go.
You got 10 seconds to play that.
You riled up Pascal. You riled him up.
That singer actually just joined the Corona deniers a couple of weeks ago.
Bullshit. She's got to be 1,000 years old now.
Yeah, and she's. I don't
actually,
say
she's
it.
not that old.
It sounds really crass, but I have the feeling that she's really, really like stone dumb. And she was always on this esoteric trip and kind of advocating esotericism and stuff like that. And now
before we figure out what's wrong with Deep State Cuba, I just want to contextualize for our audience how we met our comrades from Germany. They contacted us all the way from Deutschland because they said they were fans of our show. And we set up a live stream on their show in Germany on a Saturday, and it went splendid. It was wonderful.
Absolutely.
It went so well that we promised to have them come back on our show to talk all things German politics. So This is Revolution podcast is going international.
Can you hear me now?
Nice. Thanks for having us.
Wait,
so
you
honored.
can?
It's really.
We can hear you. Yeah, Kuba, can you fix your volume?
He's there.
Oh, thank God.
Now that I hear him, he's even more scarier with the tie.
I know. Even though he does look kind of like a, I don't know, computer IT kind of person.
He has this
Computer IT people are scary.
Yeah, exactly that. Like he has this.
But I want to ask all our
don't you
people to make sure that they go and subscribe to Nadim and Daniel's YouTube channel so they can get to over 1,000 on their subscriptions. So you should check them out. They occasionally do stuff in English.
Awesome.
They're wherever you're watching,
we do.
There's a link in the description with a link to their YouTube channel. So
the German Mulder, yes, thank you, Erica. I was about to say, Kuba obviously is Fox Mulder, right?
The Polish Mulder.
He works in the deep state, but he's kind of not in the deep state. He's kind of like working for us, but the deep state kind of still likes him because it's so good. So,
because I wear the tie.
And also the tie and everything. Yeah, it's just about like we just need to learn about your addiction to porn, and then we would know whether that really fits.
I mean, I think that's common knowledge. I wouldn't say anybody needs to learn about it. But slide in my DM.
Does that make Pascal Scully?
No.
It's funny because that's a little bit of a thing that I recently said to Nadim, because I always go like I can get very emotional about political topics, and he's like, yeah, but where are your facts, man? So I always say it. He's the Scully to my just getting crazy.
Before Gene jumps in, I wanted to ask a question that was not even on the questions. And I think it's relevant to a comment you made about the woman who's a singer of 99 Luftballons. Is how, Nadim and Daniel, how is Germany dealing with the COVID phenomenon? And what is going on with the COVID, the Delta variant? How is the government reacting? Is there strong COVID opposition, anti-vax, anti-mask? What exactly are the realities dealing with the politics of COVID in Germany?
You want it, Daniel, or should I?
You take this first. I just get angry.
Yeah, I mean, so there was. It's difficult to answer this question like with just one statement because it's really a process. So, in the beginning of the pandemic, there was this notion of, oh, Germany has basically dealt with the virus in a way that kind of, we didn't have a lot of death. We didn't have a lot of dead people. Our death rates were very low, also compared to other countries in Europe, even wealthy countries just like Germany. But then when the second lockdown hit, which was like after the summer 2020, that kind of escalated rather quickly. Of course, we didn't have the vaccines by that time, and by January we had death rates per capita that were higher than the worst that you had in the US ever on certain days, right? So that really went out of control. The reason for that was also that the vaccine distribution in Germany was kind of handled by the European Union. There were a lot of fuck ups happened there that basically resulted in Germany getting vaccines very late. And at the point where we are right now, we have enough vaccines to actually fill up buses with them and put buses on the street to invite people from the street to come and get vaccinated. But we are kind of stagnant in terms of the number of people that we are vaccinating. So we are I think something like 60% of people have double shots. And now, of course, the Delta variant is coming around and numbers are slowly going higher again. But by numbers, I only mean the incidence, the case incidence, not the fatality rates, because those are not that bad yet. But most experts here say if we don't get the vaccination rates up, we will have another small catastrophe by the fall. So that is more or less at least how we dealt with this on a health, from the health perspective. And then there is definitely the problem of we call them Querdenker by now. These are like basically a protest movement that meets a lot in Berlin, but also in other cities, and protests corona restrictions, masks. I mean, you have the stuff in the US too, and they of course are also vehemently anti-vax, right? So that movement, I mean, it's kind of big. Especially, it's kind of big when it's medially represented. So it's a huge outrage always, and especially bourgeois politicians like work their asses off arguing against them, and there are a lot of talk shows. But in fact, I mean, if you really look at how many people in the society are willing to get the vaccine, I mean, the latest statistics I looked at are basically that over 80% say either yes or rather yes to the questions of whether they would get the vaccine if it were available to them, right? So I don't think it's sure. Go ahead.
It's a little bit like the same as it was before, because they are kind of like amplifying certain parts of the society that are not okay with the measures, etc. But to be honest, those were like even from the get-go not the ones that made the infection rate spread up. So, for example, they were showing videos of young people having small parties in parks and were like, this is what brings up the numbers. But actually, the reality was that we had mass outbreaks in retail, in warehouses, and especially in slaughterhouses. Germany is one of the biggest pork
industry
of the world. So it was basically the labor force that got infected, and they did nothing about that for quite some time. And then they even Altmaier, the ministry, even said that with him there will be no right to home office. I hated him for that. I still do. And then they kind of like was, if you can do home office, and then nobody did, and there was like surveys that not even 40% of the office workers are doing home office because they're still pressured to going into work. And then they were like, we're not making this a law, but we're about to. And then finally most companies started sending people home, and then also the numbers went down. I think this is a direct connection. And that also now with the anti-vaxxers, I think they're exaggerating the issue to kind of like make other dysfunctionalities or maybe things we just don't know yet, I'm gonna say, a little bit more blurry and blame it on them, because I don't think they're the issue right now.
what is the political makeup of the anti-vax, anti-COVID restriction movement? Are they on people on the right, on the left? Do they tend to be conservatives, or is it a mix? Is hot? What's the class makeup? Do they have a general, like for example, in America, the perception is that the anti-vax, anti-COVID precaution coterie are right wingers, Trump supporters. Mm-hmm. Is there a consistency in terms of that? The people who have those politics, do they come from one flank of the political perspective?
I would say
and let me tell you a story about that. Maybe. Sorry, Kuba, I interrupted you, I think.
Oh, I just wanted to remind people that the anti-vax protests got some international attention because of this very dramatic scene where demonstration in front of the Reichstag turned into a rush to try to get into the building. And there was that one lone crazy security officer who was standing in front of the crowd, shouting back, and it was quite shocking to see that kind of breakdown of order in what's often considered to be the most disciplined and best governed Western country.
Right. I mean, okay, two questions. The first that Pascal basically asked, I mean, the first time that I've seen a demo like that, I was in the city and they were walking through a street where I had to go, basically I had to go to my gym. And I then went up to my gym for second floor. I looked out of the window and I just watched them pass by. So I would see people with a so-called Reichsflagge. Reichsflagge is a flag that is basically a substitution Nazi flag. It's a military flag that basically is it's supposed to be an emblem for the German military, especially in the Second World War. You know, in Germany, it's forbidden to show the swastika. It's forbidden to show this red, white, and black flag. So Nazis show the Reichsflagge. So I saw that actually in the front, and quite a few of them. But then, interestingly, pride flags. A few seconds later, Israel, US, Antifa, right? Left, esoteric flags. Any kind of like a mixture of everything that you can think of. I actually took a video out of that. Maybe I'll send it to you. You can have a look, because that's also why this question is very difficult to answer. I mean, obviously after a while, this was very much in the beginning. After a while, those protests have been co-opted, also especially by right-wing players that are interested, of course, in this kind of populism. But the initial setup, and also I would say even the setup until now, is very much, it's very difficult to assess what is the main fraction or the main milieu that is represented in these groups. Because you have esoteric Germans, you have left-leaning anti-vaxxers, anti-state authoritarian, like anti-authoritarian people that are also running in there. You have you have right-wing Nazis, like full-blown Nazis, that are also there to like propagate their Nazi stuff. So that was also like one of the things that was discussed a lot last year, because there were a lot of people that when journalists went into those demonstrations, a lot of people were being interviewed, and you realize these are just normal guys. Like some of them are just normal people that don't like to get vaxxed. Okay, they are anti-vaxxers. They don't like those corona restrictions, and they're worried, and maybe they have other reasons to be there, but they're kind of normal people. And then one of the question was, okay, so, but you know that this guy right there, do you see this guy? He's like standing 3 meters down the road. That's a Nazi. Like he's wearing a Nazi flag. He's carrying a Nazi flag, and you're actually with this guy on the same demo. And this cognitive dissonance was never really resolved for them. They were like, yeah, okay, we can't control everything and everybody that comes here, but still our matters are important to be heard, etc., etc. So that is very difficult, and I think that has to be studied. There are also already some studies going on, and what really happened there. And also, if you speak of class makeup, you will have this kind of opposition throughout all classes. You will have that in capitalist classes. You will have that in what you would call maybe the PMC, like political classes or the managerial classes. And you will also have that in the lowest classes in the capitalist hierarchy of workers or service workers, etc., etc. But you will also have a lot of people that get vaxxed. As I said, 80% of the population in Germany, at least according to some recent polls, are willing to do that, right? So I'm also with Daniel on this to say, okay, let's not exaggerate this thing. It's a huge movement. We should really investigate it. And it is also connected to a lot of other movements that we had in Germany, like the AfD and the Pegida and all this stuff. But yeah, let's not lose our shit because of it. I don't think it's that big of a problem.
Wow, that's incredible. So, can you guys tell us a bit about the current political situation in Germany? Many of us have read about the floods and how has this affected the people generally. There were recent floods in Germany. You can elaborate on that. And how will that affect the upcoming elections?
I will take this one. Actually, it was a bit surprising to me. First, that we have a flood like this, because over 100 people died, and that's just insane. This has never happened in my lifetime. At least I don't know anything about this. And the political reaction to me in the beginning, because it was the main part that was hit was Nordrhein-Westfalen, which is actually the how can I say, the region, the county where our next chancellor's candidate from the CDU is from, Armin Laschet. And his reaction was just so boneheadedly stupid. He said things like, yeah, just because of one day you don't change the course of politics, because a lot of people said that this was connected to climate change, etc., etc. And there were also videos where people were shouting at him because they lost everything, and Nadim told me about this, and he just replied, "You're filming me with a smartphone. You can't be that poor." So really, like the lowest level of idiocy. I cannot phrase that any more positively. And it did affect the vote. But to be honest, not in the least to the extent that I would have thought, because some time ago, a little longer ago, the Greens were actually in the front, and it looked a lot like we're gonna have a female Green chancellor in the future, Annalena Baerbock, and I intensely dislike her too. So don't get me wrong. And now then it switched over to Armin Laschet, and I thought in that moment where he was behaving like that, there was another video of him where the president of Germany was giving a speech of condolence to the victims of the flood. He was like very severe. He does that very well. And in the background there was Armin Laschet just laughing his ass off, like really, like his body was shaking with laughter, and he got caught on tape doing that during that condolence speech, and it did affect him marginally from my perspective. He's still the front runner, and he most likely is going to be the next chancellor of Germany. And I think, what do you have to do wrong to just get kicked out of the race? What do you need to do to be disqualified as a serious politician in Germany by now?
Can you give us some of what are his politics like?
He's interesting, actually. He's I would say that he's definitely to the right of Angela Merkel. He has close ties with the Opus Dei, if you're familiar with that.
So he's Catholic.
He's Catholic. He's devoutly Catholic. He made a very interesting Twitter comment just some time ago how important his Catholicism is, and he said it was really interesting. It was actually a good how can I say, argument for socialism and communism, because he said that what differentiates him from, for example, communists is that he believes in an afterlife where things will be great. Communists don't, so they have to make this life great. And I was like, yeah, that's fucking right.
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that?
Thanks for the clarity here. And he does just today, while still being in bed, I checked his Twitter, and he said, "I'm all for diversity. That's why I believe a man and a wife should be the parents of children."
Oh my god!
And I was like, "What the fuck are you going on about?"
Wow,
he's a slick one, this guy.
I know, like. It's almost impressive, the depravity.
Yeah.
Someone said that is he literally like a Christian fundamentalist?
Mm-hmm. I would agree to that.
Like
a reactionary fundamentalist. Fundamentalist, sure. I mean, you can call it like this. He's a reactionary for sure. Yes, definitely.
Wow. So isn't this kind of a hard turn to the right for Germany?
Not, because I think the politics...
I mean, that's a relative statement, of course.
Yeah, because like from a fiscal or economical perspective, he's just going to pursue the same course that Angela Merkel, who also is a preacher's daughter. So the Christianity is... I mean, it's the Christian Democratic Union. That's the name of the party. So it's not like, what, a Christian? And,
but she's Protestant, right?
She's Protestant, yeah.
Isn't this new chancellor coming out then of South German politics, like the...
CSU.
The CSU.
No, he's from the far most western parts of Germany. He's actually close to the Netherlands border. I think.
Rhineland-Westphalia or
North Rhine-Westphalia, yes, very right.
But let's get a little bit of context for our viewers about German politics, because I think people might we might have to like slow it down, because I don't think everybody's super familiar with the political context in Germany. So for our viewers, can you guys give a little bit of an outline of German politics in terms of who are the big players, and what are their ideological orientations, and perhaps for our American or British viewers, how do those map onto politics in the Anglo-Saxon world? Just to give us a little bit of context before we start hitting some of the topics in greater detail, so that people know exactly who is the CDU, who are the SPD, who are the Die Linke, who are Alternative for Deutschland, who are all these different groups, what are their ideological makeups, and those kind of...
To piggyback on Gene's question, could you also clarify the relationship between the national government of Germany and the EU? To what extent does the EU play a role in German political? You mentioned the vaccination rollout was handled by the EU and kind of botched. Is the EU a big deal? How important is it? And the parties as well.
Oh, I just got my favorite question in the chat. Who are the Anti-Deutsche? But we'll talk about that later.
That's gonna be a shitstorm.
Yeah, I mean, parties. We can maybe give a rundown through the main players there. Like I would say, if you look at the last 30 years, then you have like 5 parties that are more or less the main players, the guys that always end up in the government, which is topmost the CDU, CSU. It's a coalition out of a party that is called the CDU, which means it's Christian Democratic Union, and then we have the CSU, which is a Christian Social Union. That's basically a sister party that mostly operates in Bavaria. They have created a body of basically a coalition between those two parties, and they get elected for the government. These are basically our conservatives to reactionary. I think they have a big spectrum of people. They have people that are rather just conservative, but more like trying to be closer to the center. But especially with the CSU, they have people that are very, very, very far off to the right. And this is also why some of the outrage at the AfD. I don't normally join in to that outrage that much, because the CSU, which is the sister party of the CDU, already covered that, and basically the AfD just started competing for those right-wing seats. Basically, there was a saying from the CSU in Bavaria, which said, correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, because you are actually from Bavaria. It said, right of the CSU, there is to be nothing but a wall.
Yes. Right.
So that's their saying. So the idea is that they are supposed to be the rightmost party that there is. That was their understanding about their politics. Okay. So quickly. Yes, Daniel, go ahead.
Just add a little bit on that statement. That statement was done by Franz Josef Strauss, who I consider the last king of Bavaria. He was the prime minister up until the 80s, and he was so corrupt and so criminal that his son just got in prison for trying to access his father's accounts abroad, and that was already so deep into illegality that he got caught for it. And he actually meant that. He said there is no space for a party to the right of the CSU. And there is, like, it is known that he also had very close ties with old Nazis, for example. So, and that not people that were advocating Nazi and white supremacist policies openly, but like people who just like got away with it after the Third Reich. And that was,
your everyday Nazis, your mom and pop Nazis.
And that's a little, and that's the culture of the Bavarian CSU. So like they used to be super far right to, I would say, like solid center. And yeah.
And just so people are aware, Germany is a federal system. So
yes.
When Daniel and Nadim are saying prime minister, it's of the federal region of Bavaria, which is the successor state to the Kingdom of Bavaria. So So Germany, since its formation in 1871, has had some kind of federal system, you know, a very important and powerful federal system. So that's just something I think viewers need to be aware of about how German politics operates, which is kind of a little bit unique in the European context, because in Europe you have unitary nation states, but in Germany you have this federal federal system. So sorry for interrupting, but that's the CDU, that's the conservative wing of politics. So who are the other players?
Right, and important to notice that, of course, I mean, maybe you know that our Chancellor is from that party, so she comes from the CDU, right? So that's important to know, and that, of course, one of their main policies, like in many other conservative parties, has been a neoliberal one. So then we have the SPD, which is a very famous, world famous party, of course, because it used to be like the foremost socialistic party at some point, like 100 years ago, and then it became this very strong social democratic party, which it is, I would say, it has basically abandoned this since like maybe 20 years, maybe 15 years, and it has become a more.
What was the catalyst for the abandoning of the social democratic?
Neoliberal restructuring at the beginning of the
1990s.
The fall of the Soviet Union.
So the third way.
Yeah. Neoliberalism wasn't brought to Germany by the conservatives. It was brought to Germany by the Green and the Red parties, or by the SPD and the Green party. So can you talk about that later in more detail?
Yeah. We have that later. Yeah. No, everyone was doing
exam right now, but
sorry, I didn't get
no
that.
problem.
I said, sorry, you guys are having to do a history exam right now. There's just a lot.
No, it's great. It's great. It's great.
Yeah, so the SPD has basically, as I said, abandoned that. It has become also one of the neoliberal center parties. It has slightly less reactionary undertones, especially in their rhetorics. So I'm always like, if I try to compare for the American audience, I would like locate the CDU, CSU more like towards the Republicans, and the SPD would be the Democrats. And these are also mainly the big forces that are battling for the majority of the seats. At least it was like this for a long time. But because the SPD has abandoned their constituencies over so many decades now, they are constantly losing votes and constantly losing seats. And that actually gets us to the third party, which is the Green Party, which in polls right now, which in polls right now is actually the second party. Exactly, it has basically like I think the latest poll I've seen is 18% are with the SPD and 19% are with the Greens, right? But of course, it's polls. Let's see what happens in a month.
One question about the Greens. Would you say that they're like a PMC party, mostly?
Oh, absolutely.
And they're very different from the American Greens.
So they're not a left party.
No,
absolutely not.
Not in the least.
Look, let's see. Because I'm going to talk to Varn tomorrow, so I want to take care with how I use the term PMC, because I don't want him to bash me. But there is a youth base of this party that is very much interested in creating some change, and I would say even some leftist change. That I think that's undeniable. That's also closely connected to the Fridays for Future movement, and these people are trying to push the party towards where they actually originated from, which is like 20, 30 years ago. They were a much more left-leaning party with anti-authoritarian roots, anti-war roots, and very much grounded in the environmental movement, which basically it has abandoned right now, and it has become, I mean, I don't say this lightly, but it has become a fully neoliberal, just like the SPD or CDU party that has basically the same advances. They have some coating now on the top of, we're going to tax the rich a little bit more in order to make some gains, I guess, also because basically they're just pulling along with what the other parties are also saying. And but the anti-war movements is basically gone out of the Green Party. The Green movement, the environmental movement, is basically also gone. It is basically now a green capitalism. So the idea, how can we incentivize companies, and how can we change from producing coal or getting our energy from coal and move to move from gasoline cars to electric cars, etc. And much less structural discussion, or no structural discussion at all. And one of the important moments was also that after the Parteitag, which is like the moment when they basically decide on their program for the next election, and they then presented this program to a group of representatives of their constituency. The capitalist wing of this audience it gave standing ovations for their program. So you do definitely see no threat for capital, no threat for the status quo from their side. So I would definitely say they have no left aspirations. Their youth base might have, but I would say they should leave the Green Party.
I have a quick follow up to that, and this is actually for the entire panel. There was a video that I shared with our friendly chat, a Big Think video, where there was kind of players and economists across the conservative to liberal spectrum that were speaking about, is a socialist / capitalist economy, can you combine both? And the majority of the people that were speaking were like, because of excess inequality, maybe we should look at more social goods programs. Is the same thing happening in Germany, as you were saying, that now everyone kind of has to agree that there's certain programs that we just need because inequality is at such a crazy level?
Do you have a new left in Germany like we have in America?
Well, maybe we'll get there if I just tell you about the two other parties, and I think then we have it covered. Because I think I'll answer your question. And then there is a liberal party, or let's say a libertarian party, maybe a libertarian pendant, which is called the FDP, the Free Democratic
aristocrats,
Party.
oddly enough.
Yes, and aristocrats mostly, he says. Yeah. This party has always hovering around the 5% mark. 5% is the mark that you have to hit in order to get to the government. Okay, and they have been hovering around that. Many times they have made it in. There were sometimes in the last 20 years that they haven't. But yeah, they have also some backing now. I think they're at 7% regarding the polls now. And then we have the left party. The left party is basically, and it literally is called the left, Die Linke. It means the left.
A bit arrogant, I think, but
yeah, it's that's why all my friends that are in the party that consider themselves Marxists, they make a point about not calling it the left. They make a point about calling it the party, the left, such that there is a distinction there. Because of course, the left basically used to be a party that was called the PDS before, Partei Demokratischer Sozialismus, Democratic Socialism, and that basically was also a party with a lot of functionaries from the old GDR after the fall of the wall. And when the wall came down, they still had a quite big backing. And if you look at the numbers, they have been going down. Pretty linearly, basically. There is a linear decline of how people like to vote for them. There are several reasons for that. I think we go into detail about this later. Basically, it's about them not. Yeah, okay. We'll talk about the details after. But the point being is that right now we see them at 6 to 7%, and there are the first voices that are actually voicing that they will not be joining the government anymore because they might actually not make the 5%. Some voices are suggesting that. So that's more or less the situation of the parties.
Let me ask you a question.
What about the?
Let me just ask really quick, G.
Yes, Varn is in the chat. Varn is in the chat, and I saw him talking German, and I really love it. And he's saying something that's very true. Die Linke is a GDR retirement commission. I mean, there are a couple of in this party there is still a big size of people. I would say maybe a third or maybe a quarter. It's not the majority. That are still these old guys from the PDS that are also still basically people that were already functionaries in the old GDR, and they are still operating in this company. That's true. Yes.
One of the things that we
this
always
party. Sorry.
Oh, I was about to say, one of the things that we always complain about in the United States political system is that we have a duopoly. Basically, we just have Republicans and Democrats, and they just coalesce with each other to screw most of the population. My question to you is that since you have a multi-party system, does that actually avoid the convergence of political forces to end up working at the behest of capital to the detriment of the population? Or do you find that no more of a remedy to the coalescing of capital and controlling politics through oligarchs or anything else?
Can I take this one?
Sure.
No.
No. Okay. Oh, damn you, authoritarian socialist. Oh, no.
Yeah.
No. Actually, I would say in the beginning, it did. But fun fact, Nadim started 30 years ago. I will now go back to right after the war, because right after the war, Second World War, of course. So that's when we Germans say the war. That's the one, you know. Right after the war, even the conservatives were anti-capitalist. So make no mistake here. The first programs of the CDU were distinctly anti-capitalist. They didn't believe capitalism was a sustainable system. And there was actually a huge diversity of ideas going on in how to have a so-called, they called it soziale Marktwirtschaft, like a social market economy. So they put the social in front of it even. Because they wanted to have a welfare state, etc., etc. And there was a lot of plurality going on with discussions. Of course, we always had right wings. Of course, we had the ex-Nazis, we had new Nazis, we had new right wings. Everything. What actually happened, and this is where Nadim started with 30 years ago. What, in my opinion, happened is that all the important parties became this amorphous capitalist blob. You can barely differentiate them anymore. They have bits and pieces that make them distinct from each other because they how can I say, they emphasize one aspect of neoliberalism more than the other parties. But in the end, there is no alternative to them. Wow. So even with the German party Die Linke, which by now is at best a social democratic party, there's no socialism inside for them. I would say I always call it, they get honed down. They get honed down until they are like a sphere that fits into the capitalist system. Like, there you go, no problem with you. And I would say that no matter who wins the election, if it's the SPD, the Green, or the CDU, the politics are going to stay the same afterwards.
Okay, wow. And just to pick up on that and to tie it back to my previous question.
Can I just add something?
Sure.
Can I just add something just real quick? Because I do think it's important to distinguish. And I'm hearing that there is a scratching in my microphone or something, but I'm sorry for that. Like my microphone sucks. I need to get a new one. Anyway, I do think it's important to distinguish. If the question is our multi-party system, does it allow you to contribute or to take part more than in the US? Like, at least from the stuff that I know what's happening in the US, I would definitely answer with a yes. So I mean, you still have myriads of options of little parties you can vote for. You have, as I said, these 5 big players. We left one out, which is the AfD. We're going to talk about them later. But that at least gives you some leeway to create some pressure on certain parties in a different way than if you have just two parties. I think that is undeniable. Does that lead to you actually having an impact in the greater scheme of the political movement of decades on where this is heading? Yeah, I have the same doubts as Daniel there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So basically, what we're saying is that multi-party systems, in the German context anyway, are no guarantee to being a barrier to the effect of capital coalescing and controlling government.
Agreed.
I think it maybe puts a brake on it a little bit strong. Like, there is maybe a brake on it that makes it a bit slower, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't think that it's the game changer. No.
But to pick up
just to provide a little bit of context before, and I'll let Kuber in, is just so our viewers know, the Germans' system of government is allows for proportional representation. So they have constituencies and they have at-large members. So if you are a political party that has support distributed across a region rather than concentrated in an area. If you get more than 5% of the national vote, you can get some representation in parliament. So it's a very different. It's actually, it's one of the better electoral systems that exist, because it does allow for greater representation. But of course, as Daniel and Nadim have kind of outlined, it might be better than the US system, but it is not necessarily a panacea to stopping. Well, Pascal talks about the 50-year counter-revolution in the American context. Perhaps in the German context, you might talk about the 30-year counter-revolution.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's absolutely right, but I wouldn't be deep state Cuba if I didn't want to bring in large impersonal bureaucratic forces that operate invisibly in every aspect of our lives. Of course, I mean the EU. So to what, and there are a couple of things. Like, one, I think that just a basic primer on what the EU is responsible for and the relationship between the EU and the nation states, a country like Germany, would be helpful for our listeners. But also, when you talk about how the German parties, regardless of where they start out ideologically, get whittled down to different flavors of neoliberalism, how much of that has to do with the fact that with the EU, essentially, many structural questions about the economy in the European context are handled outside of national governments, and instead end up being bureaucratized and become matters of regulatory tinkering at the transnational EU level. So it doesn't matter what your ideology is. If you get elected, you're Chancellor of Germany, the very first thing that happens is someone from Brussels says, these are all of the things you can't do. Don't mess with the economy because you'll break up.
Well, I'd say yes and no, because I think in general what you're saying is correct, but you don't have to forget that Germany is the most powerful and most important power in the European Union and can very much direct what's happening here to a certain extent. So that's just a caveat on top. I don't think that there is 100%, everything is done what Germany wants. But if we look at what happened in the last 20 years, at least since the European currency has been put onto the market, and we have this currency area, shared currency area, it has basically been 100% benefit for Germany, economically speaking, right? So if you talk about,
Germany's considered the bête noire of the EU. Basically, they're the ones that everybody hates because the story goes that the EU is basically the pawn of the Germans. They're the one who call the shots.
It's complicated. I let's not get I don't want to get into the conspiracy thing. It's, of course, there are many different players, and there are also capital players and other national players in there, and there's a lot of bureaucracy. That's true. I totally agree with that. But if you empirically look at what happened, the decisions that were made, and even the structure of the European Union has been from the beginning built to benefit particularly countries like Germany and maybe France, and that's it, right? We can talk about this more in detail, what I mean by that afterwards, but maybe.
Although, as a poll, quickly, right, someone from one of the poorer EU countries, between market access and structural adjustment funds, there's a lot for the less developed peripheral regions of Europe to like about the EU. So even if it was designed with Germany in mind, it's not a system of unidirectional domination. There's definitely a carrot in there.
I like the carrot analogy. I would call it a leash. There's a certain leash, because if you play ball, you can benefit from it. But if you don't play ball, they're gonna fuck you over. And there was this watershed moment that happened with Greece. It's like, to me, it was one of the most important moments in the European politics, and I'm astounded that Germans don't all, like, especially the German left, didn't react like that. So the financial crisis hit Greece particularly bad. There was a lot going on. They were like close to a state bankruptcy, and they were negotiating with German banks. And they did not want to push further austerity politics on their population. And the negotiations failed miserably because they had one bluff up their sleeve, which was like, if you force us into austerity, we might just leave the EU. And like the legend has it that the first day of negotiation, Varoufakis met up with Wolfgang Schäuble, and Wolfgang Schäuble said, if you don't want to push austerity politics on your people, why don't you just leave the EU? And so they were pretty much screwed from that moment on. And
although it's funny, I think the Greece and the UK are two cases of EU discipline at work, because the EU doesn't have that many levers of influence to steer its members when they get wayward. So I think in the case of Greece, this was a country that had mismanaged its economy in a counter to all EU directives and guidance. They hired McKinsey in order to cook the books so they can get into the euro, and that's a matter of record. So there was like fraud and corruption on the part of the Greek government, and the EU decided to make an example of them. Same with the UK, except for political reasons. In that case, if you leave the EU, this is what happens. Don't leave the EU.
There's another one. Let me quickly elaborate a little bit on that. The Greeks went as far as to call for a public vote. Do we want more austerity politics? And the vote was with a vast majority a no. We have to find another way. And then what happened is that what just makes the Greek people go crazy whenever they see a picture of Wolfgang Schäuble, is because they just ignored that vote. They were like, yeah, you voted, but we don't care. You're doing austerity politics. And what I want to expand on, Kuba, is it's not only about disciplining Greece for mismanaging their economy. There is one super important aspect you should never forget. It's the outside border of the EU. It's a coastline across Africa. This is where the refugees land, actually, like literally, if they manage to go across the Mediterranean Sea. They mostly land in Greece. And so Greece is on a very, very short leash. And the German government basically, they don't say it out loud, but basically they're like, take care of the fucking refugees or else. So that's basically one very important aspect, because with Turkey, they have this pact, the so-called refugee pact. But with Greece, it's just, they just pummeled them into submission. And with Dublin II, which states that any refugee is to be processed, very, very Amtssprache, is to be processed in the country of the EU that he or she first entered, it is most likely Greece. And that's a country that is so piss poor by now that their firefighters are buying their equipment on their own because the state does not supply it anymore. So that's a very, very nasty play going on right now. And I'm every time I go to Greece a lot because I have friends and family there. I'm always astounded that they're not as anti-German as it is to be expected.
And so as we're coming to it's kind of the end of an era, can you kind of even go into Angela Merkel and how she's explained the CDU success over the past decade, but also kind of what changes Merkel has brought to Germany, or if any?
I mean, Merkel. Merkel.
Subject, I see. You guys are like, damn, I don't even want to answer. Like, oh man, this bitch.
Mutti Merkel, we call her, right? So
Mommy Merkel.
Mommy Merkel, exactly. Mommy Merkel. So how do you best describe her? I mean, let's say it like this. There is a public perception of her, and there is a performance that she gives. And then there is the policies that are standing behind her government, right? If you look at the public face, she's been always a very calm and very calculated, very reasonable person, but at the same time not cold. We had like moments that actually went viral, where she would, I don't know, pat little refugee kids because they started crying in an interview about, having to be sent back to their country, and their parents have to go back and they would like to stay here. And so she showed a lot of human emotion and humanity, let's say. Other people would point out the hypocrisy of this while the refugee crisis was going on. But okay, let's leave it at that. At the same time, she has like a scientific background. She's a PhD in physics, I believe, or chemistry, chemistry. Well, one of them.
Physics,
and physics, yeah. So she when it came, for example, to the pandemic, she took the very reasonable and pro-science approach, let's say, yeah. And she also had a way, especially in the pandemic. I mean, I must say, in the pandemic, even though I consider her one of our greatest enemies, I was impressed by the speeches that she delivers to TV, state TV, when she was talking about how there's a pandemic coming and everyone has to, we have to take care of each other and we have to now, keep distance, even though it's hard. Don't go visit your parents, etc., etc. And she did that, at least for me. I think a lot of people will flip at me now, but for me, she did that on a very convincing note. And I do think that even considering where she comes from, being a daughter of a priest, Protestant priest, I do think she has that sense of morality, maybe, or the understanding about herself. At least it seems that way. But then there is her politics, and I mean, there we are just looking in the complete different direction, right? So I must say, to be honest, her policies in terms of neoliberal restructuring compared to what happened before under the SPD and the Green Party is not worse. All right. So I mean, this we should keep in mind. She already took the boat at a moment where everything has been more or less set up, and she just had to sail it. All right. So one of the things that in German media and satire, especially in German satire, cabarets, like cabaret theater, people would make fun about is how basically invisible she is. She is not really showing that she's doing anything. She doesn't really have an agenda. She doesn't really go and change things. She occasionally she turns up in a speech in the Bundestag and stuff, but she's not really there, especially for example the Chancellor we had before, Schröder, who was like an all-out, he used to be in the socialist part, the Young Socialists, even with his gold chain around his neck, and he would always be very macho. She was very quiet. So he would not. Sorry. Oops, sorry, that's me.
When you say gold chain, are you using?
Yeah. A gold chain. Like he would have a suit.
A disco Saturday night.
He would have a suit, a shirt, and below his shirt, he wouldn't have a tie on, and below his shirt, he'd have a gold chain. Like
and that's
was like that.
Yeah. That's how y'all rock. It's like you gotta have
gold or silver. I don't know. It's supposed to.
You mean his chain? It was his chain of office. His chain of office.
Yes, there you go. It's a symbolic chain, probably. Yeah, right.
That's pretty
cool. But then if you look at okay, let's come back to her politics. Her politics basically were a continuation of the neoliberal trend, and especially when it comes to, and now it goes, the refugee crisis, because everyone thanks her, everyone bows in front of her because of the refugee crisis. That actually was a big nightmare, not the fact that she let, or she basically not formally, but rhetorically invited people, because don't forget, Germany didn't have closed borders in the sense for people that are looking for asylum. By international law and by European law, we are obligated to take people. She didn't change much there, right? There was no new laws passed there. But what she did do, she put herself on TV and she said, these people should come here and we should take care of them. That's our human obligation. We should do that, right? And that, of course, still had some effect on ideology and on how people dealt with this. But then, if you actually look what the bureaucracy and her policies did on the borders, if you look at, for example, what was done on the border from France to Libya, and how we now in Libya are basically looking at concentration camps where these refugees are basically put indefinitely. We have reports of rapes, of killings, of children losing their parents, slave trade, all of this shit, under basically payment of the European Union. So these contractors that are doing this in Libya are being paid by European states in order to keep the refugees out. And then we have a whole different crisis, which is the crisis of boats that are coming to the European Union. And you maybe have heard about this, that there are a lot of rescuers going out there and trying to save people because they're about to drown. And Germany is one of the foremost countries who actually combats that. Her government is one of the foremost countries who tries to prohibit and put on the penalty the saving of people on the ocean. So if you go out with your boat and you try to save people, you could go to jail as of now. And there are actually court cases happening because of this.
Is there a woman that was recently convicted?
That was in Greece, I thought.
Yes.
Was it in Greece? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
No, we also had several cases like that. Yeah.
Yeah, she was rescuing.
So why then did what was the purpose of having this large number of Syrian refugees resettling in Germany then? Because there was a significant, I believe, 1 million people were brought into the country, which is, Germany is a large European country, but the concept.
Can I just give one fact to that?
Sure.
Of these 1 million people, by today, over 2/3 are working in the labor market.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean,
we have a demographic problem in Germany, right? So we actually need people to come here. We always needed people to come here.
The main motivating factor of wanting to get all the refugees in?
I mean, it was at least one of the factors why they didn't block, because they said it doesn't hurt. It might be very beneficial for us. And they even immediately after there was a huge discussion. And by the way, you often hear the term that Merkel opened the borders, which is and completely is a right-wing fabrication. She did not open any borders. She just stuck to regular German law. And wait a second, Pascal. And the thing that they did within, I think, not even 2 months when the refugee crisis, because it was not a crisis, hit, is that they, for example, came up that refugees that want to integrate themselves in the German labor market are exempt from minimum wage. So that's what is going on here.
Wow.
If it's about labor, why not Ukrainians?
They are also coming. Now, look at labor statistics. If you actually look at the what we call the Niedriglohn sector, so the low wage sector, the sector in which basically people that have not a German citizenship can be paid below any kind of minimum wage, like crazy labor conditions. You're actually not seeing Syrians there. You're seeing Polish people there. You're seeing Romanian people there. You're seeing people from Ukraine also. So that is not, the Syrians are not the ones that are being comprising this low wage sector. Yeah. Actually, most of those Syrians have been going also into lower wages sectors, of course, especially service industry, cleaners and any kind of helping forces. Yeah. But you also don't have to forget that Syria, and this is also, of course, very well known, Syria had a very highly educated population. So a lot of the friends that I have actually are studied people from university. They are doctors, they're engineers, they're psychologists, they're social workers. And as I said, again, of these 1 million people, and I'm not sure if 1 million is the right number, I mean, it's a bit more or less, I'm not sure. But of these 1 million people, it's now 2/3 are on the labor market. And in order to combat another right-wing stereotype, which is, if those foreigners come there taking our jobs, while simultaneously lowering the unemployment rate in this time. So these guys came, 1 million people came. They most of them got jobs. Some of them are still in process of getting jobs. They are in the market now, and we are still lowering our unemployment rate. All right, so don't mix that up in the sense of, then that's why so many Germans are poor. That's not true. That's not where it comes.
Is that because of retirement? Is that because of the baby boomers leaving the
yes.
leaving the?
We have a demographic problem. Yeah,
an extreme one. Yeah,
it looks like this, real quick, right?
Pascal, you want to address the super chat real quick?
Super chat. Thank you for this, Brianna, and now this discussion. I feel like I am home. Pascal 2024.
Chairman Pascal.
If you only read my FBI.
Bro.
Mao will be his running mate.
Yes. Well, that's the thing is
wow. That's great.
Who would be Pascal's running mate? He would have to have a woman running mate.
Maybe Brianna Joy Gray.
I knew you were going to say that.
It was in the sentence.
I can do that if you want.
How about
but I'll do
balance the ticket.
German question: are you using what board are you using? Are you using the A German produced board?
It's called it's just it's actually an app. I have it on my computer. I don't have an external interface. So I have a computer app. It's called Podcast Soundboard. That's what it is.
Podcast soundboard. See that, Jason?
Man, we're not making. We have like 800 followers. We're not making any money yet. So I'm like struggling with this freaking microphone. So yeah, give me a break.
But guys, get signing up to that podcast and get them over to 1,000. Remember when we got it? Remember when we got 1,000, Jason? Do you remember that? Do you remember how exciting that was?
Real quick, because musically YouTube does nothing for you musically, so we never cared about our YouTube channel. And we started this channel with 18 subscribers in October of 2019.
Yes,
man, but your podcasting, the podcasting world in the US is so different, man. Like our biggest left-wing podcast that we have, and it's really the biggest. It has 27,000.
What?
Right? So yeah, people are not like. First, we are much less people than you. We're 80 million. We're not 350 million. And second, we are also not apparently Germans are not as online. 2% of the German population uses Twitter regularly.
Oh
wow!
I mean,
what's the most
fair? That's just the sign of a healthy society.
Does anyone know the answer to this question? What's the second most online country to the United States?
South Korea.
Word?
North Korea?
Yes.
I did. Yeah.
Korea.
I mean, Cuba. Yeah, Cuba. I'd probably agree. I mean, because just even the huge part of the industry, if you're looking at, is based out of South Korea. I mean, makes sense. And I think South Korea is if not number one, very close to, as far as just the amount of their population who has access to the internet.
Super fast broadband too.
Yeah,
and there's also a linguistic aspect to it because the United States is an English-speaking country, and we have this huge Anglo-Saxon sphere, and you have America is like a black hole that sucks in political discourse. So you have a bunch of people in the UK, in Australia, who spend all their time and Canada, who spend all their time commenting on U.S. politics because U.S. politics is you're between worlds, and we have
and technology. You know how we are struggling in Germany. You think, wow, Germany, they are so advanced in engineering and blah blah. We are really struggling to get decent internet connections. My internet, I don't know how it looks right now because I can't see it, but my internet basically the upstream sucks. I'm at 25 Mbits. That's it. And normally I don't cross the 5 Mbits. That's only a formal 25. And that's in the city. We're in Berlin center, right? If you go to we have rural areas that are not connected.
They don't have even full mobile coverage. So sometimes when you with your smartphone, you're like in the outskirts of Munich, you don't get mobile internet anymore.
That's the old days.
Yeah, and then you go to Poland and you have this rundown outward toilet, and you still get 5G.
I do want to ask.
Doesn't the Polish national anthem have a line which says "We will not be Germanized" or something? We will not be turned into Germans.
It's honestly, I couldn't quote you line and verse, but the title is "Poland is not yet dead." Right, it is.
Sad song.
My hat is off to them for that.
Do you know what the Kurdish? Do you know what the Kurdish national anthem's name is? The name of the Kurdish national anthem? It's "Hey Enemy." Hey enemy. Hey enemy. Hey Raqib. Hey enemy.
I want to ask a question to the panel and I want to switch everything up and fuck up all the questions we sent you guys, because of the show that we did Thursday, there's been a lot of talk in this chat about reparations, and there was some form of reparations paid out to Israel and Jewish people after the war, and everyone likes to draw a direct line, right? Everything's the same, right? Israel, Negroes, all the same political context, everything's the same. It's not. So can you explain a little bit how that happened and what's going on since the reparations?
I mean, I don't even like to compare these issues because I mean they are really different. But okay, you gave that disclaimer, so let's.
Yeah, that's why I have
take it from there.
People like to think it's all the same, and especially in the ADOS talk, they love to point to Germany, as we'll see. They did it.
Yeah, they supplied submarines for warfare. That's a great reparation.
So can we maybe take this in a bigger context? So I would propose we talk, and we can also talk about reparations that happened. But I would propose let's talk about, because probably what I have heard when I was in the US, actually there's like even a joke in some TV shows on Netflix that I saw, is this idea of, yeah, we Americans, we should do with slavery what the Germans did with Nazism, right? So basically work on it and then try to study it and then learn from it and then, grow from it, right? That is a kind of assumption that I also have from many American friends, that we Germans did that. I would disagree with that notion.
Can I just give a quick anecdote?
Completely disagree with that notion.
I give a wonderful anecdote from my mother, who witnessed that firsthand about the denazification of Germany. Is when she was a little girl and she went to the school. They had a physics eds teacher who everybody knew was an ex-SS soldier. And when the gym was particularly cold, and this is offensive for Sal, so I have to give a slight warning. He literally looked at all those 10 to 12-year-old girls. He said, like, it's damn cold in here. We better shove some more juice down the furnace. Ooh. And that was a teacher after the war talking to students, and of course this wasn't even an outrage back then. Second story I'd love to tell about this is that when the death night or the suicide pact or whatever it was at Stammheim happened, my mom was at work. And she was shocked to hear about how this crazy thing with the RAF unfolded, and she was like visibly shocked. And then her boss came to her, and she was like, "Are you feeling sorry for the terrorists? I should blame you with the police." And while doing that, you could see the SS tattoo under his arm, because they all had their blood group under their arm. And she was like, whenever you ask my mom why they had this like intense uprising in the 60s against the old Nazi elite. That's why, because they were still there. They were still everywhere.
They were in East Germany.
They were physically present.
Yeah, they were physically present.
There's a comedy video of a guy in the 70s, a German comedian giving a speech on New Year's to a big dinner.
Yes. I love that.
And he goes, hip hip, and everyone goes hooray, and then he goes Sieg, and the whole room goes Heil. And then he's like, and then everyone's like starts laughing guiltily, and then he's like, and the guys go, "Well, looks like we have a lot of old comrades in tonight." It's amazing.
Come on.
Yeah, we have a lot of old Kameraden in tonight. That was I think people don't realize how much the old Nazi political elite was integrated. I mean, this happened also in East Germany to some extent, and but in West Germany, it was like crazy. Go ahead, Marcus.
Well, it also happened here. Operation Paperclip. It's a lot more. Realized now. It's like they made a TV show. That was like, I guess, like the very few Nazis that were made uncomfortable in Germany. They were welcome.
Nazis brought Americans to the moon.
Operation Paperclip was the United States recruiting Nazi German engineers to start U.S. space exploration.
But to add some nuance, and it's weird for me to be on this side. If you, yes, like there was a large integration of people compromised by the Third Reich in Germany and the United States. But the Third Reich was a party state. So essentially, if you were a professional or if you worked for the state, you had to be a party member.
Of course. Yeah.
And we have recently a case, we can do the opposite experiment in Iraq, which was also a brutal, violent, oppressive, totalitarian party state under Saddam Hussein, genocidal. After the American occupation, they debauthicized and they did it indiscriminately and harshly. And that also that is probably worse.
I have to push back a little bit on that, because there's the Ba'athist regime was in power from 1968 to 2003, so it had a longer history of integration into the country. And yeah, but I mean, I don't disagree. Like, you know, some de-Baathification obviously would be welcomed by Iraqis, but it was indiscriminate de-Baathification. I think, you know, there are comparisons to be made, but I am always very wary of making that Iraq-Germany comparison, because that kind of false that comparative framework was the idiotic comparative framework that the American administrators who turned up in Iraq in 2003 that was the paradigm that they were looking at, and so you know, I'm very wary of making that comparison. I get your point, Kuba, but you know, I'm just wary.
Let me just try to make my position clear. Just to be clear, I'm not saying, and I do not believe, that after the Second World War we should have denazified in the same way or with the same kind of brutality and violence than happened with the Ba'ath Party in Iraq. Okay, that's not my point. My point is rather saying that, you know, we had these Nuremberg processes, the processes that were basically going against very high-profile Nazis for a couple of years. And after that, for decades, until basically the 60s, this kind of working on our past and working on our history simply has not happened. It was not on the agenda. This topic was not spoken about. There were barely any records. There were barely any people studying this. It was kind of like the thing that you don't talk about, like the Voldemort, basically, right? Now, in the 60s, it became clear that many, and I would disagree, Kuba. I would not say that it was just a couple of Nazis that also, you know, I think many of the people that were actually working in these state structures, especially higher up, were quite convinced of what they were doing and also quite aware of what they were doing. But to be fair, I'm also not saying let's kill them off, and I'm also not saying let's kill all the Nazis off, or everybody that wore a uniform or something like this, right? And then in the 60s, there happened this kind of, you know, 68 revolution, and that it was kind of had a different character here than it had in other countries, because here it was really about dismantling these old hierarchic structures. It was very much geared towards this old conservative notion of what the family is, towards the notion of what fascism is, like the whole idea of anti-fascism grew in this time, basically. And that was really the moment when we started talking about what happened again in the Second World War. But the way that this developed after a while was it became mostly some kind of, and I mean, this word maybe has a double meaning for you guys. I don't want to, maybe I say something wrong, but I'm just saying it. It had like a token function, in my opinion, which is we're talking now about what we did to the Jewish people of Europe and of course of Germany, right? And we are trying to look again into, you know, what was the ideology, what actually happened. We're having historical studies going on, and this topic of the Jew and how Germany related to the Jew became very much the forefront of this discussion. And I do think that is correct, and I think that should have been done. But what I think also should have happened is that we should have gone beyond that and see how this was not only a problem of adversary of Germans against Jews, and not only a transhistoric, you know, coming out of the air kind of anti-Semitism that maybe was already here a couple of decades ago, or maybe even 100 years ago, but then kind of developed into this, but how this is also connected to, you know, capitalist, nationalist structures, politics in this time, the crises that we had in the beginning. And on top of that, how it was not only geared towards Jews, to be clear, right? My grandfather, so I'm half Polish, right? So my grandfather was in the Polish resistance, and he went through 3 concentration camps, and he survived in the end, right? And he was freed by the Americans in '45. So I actually got to know him, but he was not Jewish, and he also didn't meet that many Jews, because in those areas where he was, there were mostly Polish people, right? Or, you know, homosexuals and Sinti Roma people. Any kind of state dissidents, communists, all of these people were eradicated. This is not trying to say, to be clear, that there was not a particularity about the focus on the Jews. There was, right? There was a clear putting in the center of the Jewish question, basically. Yeah, what I want to say is that the things that resulted from that, both in the beginning after the Second World War, where it was this Nuremberg process stuff, and then after what we did in terms of working on the Second World War and on fascism by focusing only on what we did on the Jews, became more of a performative act that did not really challenge ideologically what happened. And this is why we can still have Nazis on the street, we can still have a lot of anti-Semitism on the street, and this is also why we can then, for example, pay reparations to Israel, which we conflate with Jews, like everybody does, of course, but we do much more than everybody else. We can pay reparations to Israel and basically say, my hands are more or less clean. And this is actually what happens. I'm not saying this happens consciously, but the function of how this works, especially when you look at what happens with Palestine now, is we have worked on our past, and we have basically reflected our guilt, and we have reflected our misdeeds, and now we have the authority to speak. We can even say who is a Jew. This is what's happening right now in Germany. If there are Jewish dissidents, like in the US, there are many that are saying, I'm not with the state of Israel, I'm an anti-Zionist, or maybe I'm even a Zionist, but I'm a liberal Zionist, they get discredited as being not real Jews by Germans, right? Officially.
That's the old Göring rule. I say who's a Jew or not.
In other words, for simply still being in Germany, for simply still staying in Germany and not leaving to go to Israel, they get called inauthentic Jews?
Exactly. I mean, you know how there's like an influx of Israelis, a lot of Israelis, especially coming to Berlin, of the liberal kind of Israelis, young Israelis that want to leave this, the conflict-ridden and the pressure, and especially also for economic reasons, they're coming here because life here is cheaper. Most of them are kind of liberal, right? But if there's somebody that actually says, I'm pro-Palestinian, or I think we should go for one state, or even we should go for 2 states, please undo the settlements, or let alone, like let's not even talk about BDS. If there is a Jew that comes out like this, they will be attacked viciously. 20 years ago, that was Norman Finkelstein with he's the self-hating Jew. They don't say that anymore. They say now openly,
you're not a Jew.
These are not right Jews.
Yeah.
Openly. These are politicians.
I think that Israel, for a lot of Europeans, is it's like the Jesse Jackson of anti-Semitism. If you are Viktor Orban, if you're the German post-war government, by cultivating a relationship with Germany, you can claim that token movement that, look, I can't be anti-Semitic because I have the Israelis vouching for me. It's what American politicians do with them.
And also look what I did in the past. Look all the horrors that I've created and what I learned from that. I am now in an enlightened position.
I'm a changed man.
Can I quickly?
Exactly.
Because
I'm a changed man. Just one last sentence to come back to the reparations, Daniel. 1 second, and then I give you my last sentence. And that is why I think if all this happens at the same time, and you ask me if reparations work or not, I cannot answer you, or I cannot tell you that it did work. Yeah, were there people, victims that got money from this and they were reparated? Yes. Did it create a better situation? Did it create a more sustainable situation for Jews, even Jews in Israel? I don't think so. I think the action should have been differently. Maybe the alternative would also have reparations inside, but I can't tell you. This is not something that I can.
Let me ask you a question. Are there poor Jews that exist in Israel and in Germany?
Yes, of course.
So why are we debating whether reparations work? Because obviously it didn't, because there's still poor Jews.
Yeah.
Let me tell you why I say that. Because the assumption that the folks in America who believe in reparations is that reparations will lift them all out of poverty in perpetuity.
Cut the check.
Cut the check.
But isn't it also
that it will have a?
Isn't also the idea to have like? But isn't also the idea to have like a an even playing ground, like a starting ground, like we're all starting from the same
because the assumption is that like you cut the check, you cut everyone there $1 million or $2 million or whatever it is, and then everyone's on a level playing field, as if capitalism is not effective at otherizing discriminated groups, even when they have capital, and reducing them to the reserve army of labor through using advertising, marketing, and a myriad of other ways.
You can imagine you can imagine the reparations discourse going like this: let's give money to Liberia and send people to Liberia instead, because that's kind of how the reparations functioned with Israel. But
so how many NGOs got money during the reparations payout?
I don't know if you guys need to read Norman Finkelstein's book, The Holocaust Industry, because he
I got it here. Yeah.
He eviscerates. You read Finkelstein. I put this on Facebook. I said some people were pissed. I was like, he basically is like makes he doesn't say it outright, but he's like basically African Americans want to pimp out ethnic suffering as effectively as Zionists, and I'm just like, that's here it comes.
Yes. Reach Lomozan. That's true.
He doesn't say that, but that's the conclusion you draw from reading the book, and you're just like, wow, okay. But he basically, the book, I've read like a few chapters. He's like, the Holocaust thing is a total absolute hustle, man. It's a pimp game, and I was like, wow, Norman, man, he's going in on these folks.
But Daniel, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, which is very, very important to me, because there is a heritage to the Third Reich that is rarely disregarded, mostly disregarded, and is only discussed within the left, and only recently, very, very publicly so. So there's a part of the heritage which is even very, very beneficial to modern capitalism, and this is the fact that the Jews that were brought to the camps and deported, only a fraction of them was killed immediately. Most of them were put to work, and that slave labor moved all the super rich families in Germany, like the Klattens, the Balsens, etc. They became super rich because of 12 years unpaid labor, and because of disenfranchising and disowning Jewish property and distributing it among the functionaries of the Nazi Party. This is how they went like ballistic after the Second World War in terms of capital.
And so you can still buy those cookies.
Yeah, you can still buy those fucking cookies. And you mean I'm talking about the people who run fucking BMW. They are rich because they exploited Jew slave labor, and nobody talks about that.
This is like Volts. So like Volts. I was gonna say like Volkswagen. Like it's in the name, right?
Yeah.
Like it's literally in the name, and it's still around.
That's a bit.
This is what happened. This is what happened.
It was a state venture until the 70s, though, right? So it was a state company actually, until I think the 70s or the 60s, and then it was privatized afterwards. So that's a bit different. And I think BMW didn't exist after the Second World War, but these guys got rich from it. That's for sure.
But this is what happened in a lot of countries. Like the United States became a capitalist superpower because of forced slave labor. When people talk about plantations, I hate that word plantation. Say forced labor camp, because that's what it was.
USSR industrialized thanks to forced slave labor.
Forced labor. You look at, and also in America, you had the conquest and expropriation of the West. You look at Turkey. All these big capitalists in Turkey, where did they get their money from? They murdered Armenians. They ethnically cleansed Greeks, and they seized their properties and their businesses. You go to Israel. Israel was constructed on the appropriation of Palestinian land and things like that. So this bloody one of the things that people have to come to terms with, capitalism,
primitive accumulation,
breeds these things, breeds these conditions, and the people who benefited from this, not every single one, but there are plenty of low-key people who benefited from these systems, who maintained the wealth, their ill-gotten gains. And this is one of the things from a social democratic perspective, one of the things I would like to see as taxation is huge inheritance tax, death tax. That is the best way to appropriate these ill-gotten gains, not through income tax, but through breaking, because the bourgeoisie is not simply a class that just sort of just appears because somebody's a really good businessman. It is a class that has inherited its wealth, and very often it's inherited its wealth on extremely brutal systems of forced labor and theft, and out theft.
The way that the capitalists
if we're going to pretend to be Marxists, let's not pretend. This is what is this called in Marxist theory? Primitive accumulation. This is how capitalism gets its start. Murder, and taking land, killing people, enslaving people.
And it's not just a case of primitive accumulation either. The way that capitalist sort of peak elites look at a given society is, where are the sources of value and how can I extract from them? And if you have a pre-industrial society or a society, an economy largely based on industry, you're extracting labor. But in the United States and in the UK, the financial systems do the same thing with middle-class capital. And you have systems of extraction and appropriation, just ways to do theft legally, like the housing boom and bust, like the different stock market runs that are designed to drain. Like, the easiest way to make $1 million is to steal it. And you can do that through financial manipulation under a developed economy, like you do with primitive accumulation at earlier stages.
I mean, there's one of the things that I find interesting in the metaphor that people in the American context make to Israel in terms of the reparations demand is that my first, and I believe, is there a moral argument for reparations for African Americans? Absolutely. The question is, can you create the politics necessary to acquire those? And the second thing to me, which is a part of the equation that I ask if people have considered, can you create the material realities to protect yourself from the ramifications of you getting reparations? In other words, Israel and people of the Jewish community who are Jews who migrated to Israel, they got quote unquote reparations, and they also got military concessions from countries to build a military to protect them from being attacked. What I'm saying is
I think that's an important point. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Israel was not built on reparations.
No, exactly.
It was not built on reparations.
It was not. If you are an ethnic community in the United States who has a history of racial antagonism, and you demand reparations to compensate you for extracted labor, and that compensation is given to you, if you're in a society that consistently requires your subjugation to the reserve army of labor, but you've been compensated for your past labor, what exactly are the terms upon which that society is going to engage with you now that they have paid you for your past wages? So
they'll
now
find ways to steal it from you.
They will either find ways to steal it from you, or they will find ways to make your comfort in that society obsolete and make it very hostile for you to live in that country. What does it look like in the age of Trump for people, number one, just to demand reparations, but imagine actually getting them? What's the next step where you already have reactionary backlash to these things like critical race theory?
In Canada, during the settlement of the prairie, the Métis population in Manitoba and later Alberta, they were given title to their land after a whole bunch of political struggle under Louis Riel. And then immediately the agents of the CPR and other Anglo settlers with better connections to the center and the federal government found ways of cheating them out of all the land. So you get the title, you hold the title, and in theory, it's settled, you know, it's fair, the system works, but then your disadvantages of being at the margins of the society, at the margins of the system, are exploited to take it from you anyway.
Yeah, exactly. My ultimate question in Cuba is getting to the matter is that if you maintain the capitalist ideological superstructure and base, how do you maintain a paradigm economically to protect yourself from capital extraction even after you get the reparations?
You give the reparations and then the tax man takes it, or like the debt agency takes it, or like some other.
Oh yeah.
Someone wrote right here, racism. This is I think this comment I put on the screen is kind of the issue that I think Pascal and I and even Marcus have with the reparations discourse. Racism provides explanations that capitalism falls short to, which I totally disagree with.
No, because racism works perfectly for capitalism.
Yeah.
That's why I have a problem with people saying, remember we were talking about that video, that video we were talking about at the Tony Brown video where you see Klieg and you see all these talking about the black man may face genocide in 5 years. And you know, I say, you know, my response is black people will never face genocide in the United States. You know why? Because American capitalism requires a nigger. Who's going to be one?
Mexico.
Can I?
Nigga, what?
I would just like to add something like from the German perspective, because I mean I agree with everything that you said, and I think I have another point to back that argument up, which is, I mean, yeah, you can somehow say we did some kind of reparations, although I would question really what kind of reparations were they, if they go to a state, if they don't go to all the victims, etc., right? But okay, let's say we did some kind of reparations. I think that the core thing that we in Germany would have had to work on, and maybe still have to work on, is another thing. It's not the point how incredibly racist Germans could get against Jews or any kind of people. That is, of course, very important to work on, but there's another aspect of this which kind of makes this case, like I'm born and raised in Germany, I'm not German, but I still have this being taught to me, kind of makes this case unique, which is the industrialization of this primitive accumulation, like the scale at which this happens, and how mechanized and how cold it happens, how those were just numbers in the book, and how it was basically a full-fledged capitalist genocidal extermination process, a business basically, right? And I think there are, in this fact of that kind of uniqueness, and I don't think that's an ideological uniqueness, only the Germans could do it because, I don't know, they're Germans or something. It was probably the right moment in time for this to happen, also in terms of capitalist development and industrial development. But I think working on that and trying to understand how did that happen, that was actually the important thing to get over the horrors of what the Holocaust was here in Germany. And I think reparations and the claim of, hey, we have paid those reparations actually hindered us talking about this.
I want to address something. I got to address this. Someone says, we can still get rid of capitalism and still have racism. Facts. Okay, let me ask you a question. Let's get rid of racism completely. All racist discrimination is gone from the world. It doesn't exist anymore. Does that stop black people from being poor at the bottom of the economic food chain? How does stopping racism stop black people from being the bottom of the economic food chain? How? It doesn't. So let me ask you a question, and another follow-up question. If you had the economic controls of the means of production in a society, that means you control your share of the businesses, the stock companies, the gold, the oil, the Fortune 500 companies, the television, the media, the TV. You control your share of the way your image is created in that society. In other words, you have your share of the means of production as an ethnic group, where you have wealth that is generated from the means of production in perpetuity from that state. They call that socialism. And you also control the means of creating your image in a society so there's no negative images about you because your skin is black, because you have a share in that control of that. That's called socialism. Even now, let's say you have that and you have the wealth coming from that. Even if white people didn't like you at that stage, why would you care? Even if they were racist as hell at that stage, why would you care? Your economic means are taken care of. You're self-sufficient. You have revenue from the means of productions of the state. There are no negative images of you being perpetuated because you control a share in the media. You can control your own schools. Why? Because that's actual socialism. But yet white people still don't like you. They're still racist against you. If they are, why would you care?
Yeah,
I know.
yeah. No, it's the most basic way you could.
Socialism is not the answer. You still have racism. If I'm economically, I have enough control of the means of productions and share of all the resources of a state, where basically I'm economically independent and safe, and no ideological superstructures can be used to be painting me as an other because I own part of those shares. You think I give a damn that crackers don't like me? Why the fuck would I care?
I mean, yeah, like basically just ask yourself, like, what makes Ben Carson do what he do and work for Trump? Like, what
racist motherfucker ever?
What makes what makes Candace Owens do what she does? Is it some white supremacy ghost that gets into black people and starts or is there a framework outside of race where people can actually up their standing? It could maybe that be the focus? And like Pascal was saying, it's like, would you give a shit? Obviously you've got black people who do not give a shit that the people that hate them are in the room with them. Why? Because those white people that hate them are also giving them a paycheck that's greater than anything else that they've been able to get. So like this idea that racism is the focus, at a point, I can use white people's racism to pad my pockets, right? If I started going out about if I start a video of why I left the left and how the Democrats are evil and how the Republicans are right, and black people just need to pick themselves up by the bootstraps, at that point, I'm utilizing racism to pad my pockets. What use is it?
Damn.
Well, are we actually?
I want to take all these ridiculous, anti-racist talking points against socialism.
Just a question to you guys. Just a question to you guys. Like, do we actually believe? Do we actually believe that we can get rid of ideological justifications for hierarchies, just like racism or sexism, on a global scale during like an inside capitalism? Is that like an option for us? Do we actually think this is possible?
Exactly.
I mean, yeah, it's like in the current structure. I think one of the things people have to understand.
Maybe in the US, maybe in Germany or so, but can we do it worldwide? Can we reduce hierarchies between the global north and global south to nothing?
Yeah, I don't think you could do that without some kind of radical redistributive measures. Whether we have markets or not, that's a different question. Sorry, Cooper, you go ahead.
So I had the point that I wanted to make earlier, and I think I can tie it back in now. Nadim said something really really insightful about the distinctiveness of the Third Reich, which is other countries used forced labor and extraction. You can think of the Spanish Empire, you can think of the antebellum South, to build up capitalist infrastructure and to industrialize, or at least proto-industrialize. Germany was already industrial, but rather than moving past that primitive accumulation and extraction of labor, appropriation of land by conquest, it instead industrialized that process and applied that template to the Drang nach Osten and the Lebensraum. The entire goal being to capture more territory and more people that you could extract from and create and move more wealth to the center. In a lot of ways, globalization and the globalized financial capital that we had since the 90s is a similar approach, but using financial instruments in order to obscure the extractive process. You use
and also
debt.
the destructive effects. I mean,
Yes.
that it was just fucking destructive. That was bad for capital, for a lot of capitalists. I mean, that's not something you would do all the time.
You mean the Third Reich?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. The and also it was capitalist of one country, right? You had your collaborators, but the thing about globalization is that you have a international, transnational, transracial coalition of capitalists, the compradors in the global south, as well as elements of the upper middle class, the PMC in more developed countries, all benefit from a financialized form of appropriation and extraction from the rest of the world. And that's what globalization was, tying, slicing in new regions, new areas, new populations, new resources for, in theory, a regime of growth, but in practice, a regime of extraction that allowed those peak financial interests to use debt and financial transfers as a way to mask that extraction. Like capitalism, if it finds an extractive model, then it will apply it, and it will apply it as broadly as it possibly can.
Listen, I want to address this, and I want to say, listen, I have no problem. Listen, you get reparations. Get reparations. Reparations is not going to stop the fact that capitalism requires Black people to be disproportionately the reserve army of labor. You can get reparations in capitalism, and Black people will still be at the bottom of the barrel. That's all I'm telling you. I believe Black people will get some form of reparations, and I believe in 30 years they will still be disproportionately the ones mass incarcerated. They will still be the ones disproportionately with single parent households. They will still be disproportionately the ones that are poor.
Where do we stop? Where do we stop paying reparations? So we're paying reparations for slavery, but what about reparations for colonialism in Africa? What about reparations for?
I mean, listen, I'm
willing to make. The ADOS movement is like vehemently against that kind of shit. That's why it's the American descendants of slavery. It's a very racist movement.
Okay. Listen,
Yeah,
my position is this. I have no right to tell someone how to define themselves. I have no problem with a Black person in America saying they are American. You are American descendant of slave. You have a specific claim. I'm Haitian American. I have a different claim than you. I don't want your claim. As a matter of fact, I want to make sure I don't get associated with your claim, because I know the blowback you're going to get from your claim is going to make you wish you didn't get that claim.
Wow. Okay. I want to move back to the question of Germany, and I have like a kind of I have a question. I have a question for.
Right,
I have a question
something about this episode. Yeah,
I have a question for Nadim and Daniel. So you've talked about a lot of different political forces in Germany, but one of the things that people have been noticing overseas is the rise of this movement called Alternative for Germany, Alternative for Deutschland, which is this kind of right-wing party. Now, you mentioned the CDU has traditionally occupied that right-wing sphere of German politics. But the Alternative for Germany seems like a little bit of a weird fish. And to what extent is the Alternative for Germany a new kind of right-wing populism and something comparable to the Trump movement? Or is it something specific to Germany? Can you tell us about this movement, what it means for the political right, and how is it tied to the broader rise of reactionary politics, across Europe, with Orban, with Law and Justice in Poland, with UKIP and the right-wing shift of the Tories, and then, of course, with Bolsonaro, Erdogan, and the Trump administration. How does that fit in? What is peculiarly German about it? And can you give us a bit of a context about this?
I would say yes and no. I would say that the same mechanisms are, or similar mechanisms, not the same, but similar mechanisms are working there as they are in, for example, in Hungary, the UK, etc., like with the rise of right-wing forces and also with the rise of Trumpism. I think that they kind of like, they tap into a multitude of different crises. I rarely do this because I don't like dropping names, but let's go for Gramsci for a second here with this idea of the interregium. we are currently in a situation where all over Western capitalism, the rifts and the breaking parts are starting to get visible to about everyone. There's a lot of crisis. There's a crisis of governance. There's a crisis of social welfare in Germany. There's a crisis of media. A lot of things, of media, of trust in media. And the reaction to this by all of these, and I will just subsumize them as Western capitalist systems. The reaction to that is a stronger authoritarian streak to whatever they do, because they need to consolidate their power. So what the AfD does is they play a part. I don't think they are similar to Trump because Trump actually got power. I don't think the AfD will ever get power. I think the AfD will max out at about 20%, and maybe if we're really in the shitter, like gutter of luck, that some asshole in the CDU will coalesce with them, and that's that. But they are not the threat. Yeah.
I was gonna add to, like, does the separate parties kind of protect a little bit from those more incestuous or like right wing, extremist groups or anything like that? Like, because like with the when you've got Republicans and Democrats, it is kind of like, well, they are still Republicans, but within Germany, does that kind of like play a role? It's like, well, they're not exactly with us, but they're just does that give them space to press them away?
Well, just a note on that. Before the Second World War in the 30s, we also had multiple parties.
Yeah,
that were in the government.
And the rise of the Third Reich was actually based on a minority government. Hitler was put to power by those in power because they thought that he was the least dangerous to them. But that's a discussion that we can have another time. It's for the AfD, I have to say they play a role, and they play it brilliantly. They play the role that of how can I say, of the scapegoat. So, for example, a lot of parties can be super right-wing right now, but the moment it gets too far, they just say, yeah, but we're still against the AfD. Like we're not into that racist shit. Like, but still they perpetuate the same policies, and they even use the same rhetoric even now and then. So they are fully functional within the system. And the interesting thing is that they also come from a neoliberal background. They are not a party of pissed off, how can I say, like poorer or lower middle class people that just want their share in the wider German economy. They are a project brought to us by financial elites. And the interesting thing is that these financial elites kind of did a Faustian pact with the racist forces within the AfD. They started using the anti-Muslim rhetoric, in my opinion, just to generate clicks, so to say.
Yeah, before 2014, maybe 2015, they didn't really have that much. They were talking about regulating immigration to Germany in a way that Canada does it. So they were having that on their agenda and making migration a topic, but they didn't have this whole Islamophobia bullshit and racism bullshit inside. And there were actually conflicts in the party as to whether to go there or not, and a lot of splits happened. And some of those more reactionary forces, I would say, they prevailed in the end.
Mm. Yeah. And the AfD strikes a peculiar balance. They actually have, how can I say, they have like conservative nationalists, they have neoliberals, and they have the downright racist group. And that's the one generating the clicks. But that's not the one giving them the power. The money comes elsewhere. It's like the German white supremacist movement is not very well funded. Quite to the contrary. Ever since the V-Man scandal. Do I need to get into that? Maybe later. So they're practically the NPD, for example, the actual National Democratic, the actual Nazi party. They're barely how can I say, sustaining themselves by now. So the money comes from neoliberals or from powerful people that use the exposure because it doesn't hurt them. It doesn't hurt them if there is white supremacist or Islamophobic rhetoric in neoliberalism. The money still flows for them. So that's why they're using them. And also because they know that they can shift. I forgot the term. Nadim, help me. What's the window?
Overton window.
Or the Overton. They can be used to shift the Overton window, for example, to disenfranchise people more and more. And even like, this is going a little bit ahead of myself now, but for example, even the censoring of the right wing can be used as a repression against the left then again. So like, we need to ban hate speech. And the first thing that happened when YouTube integrated that fucking algorithm is that like 10 organization of comrades of mine, all of them anarchists, just vanished from YouTube.
Yeah, and I think pretty sure that happened even to Jason. That's that's kind of something like maybe worldwide.
I did.
And when they start talking about like, hey, this talk over here from these people on the right that we all agree are bad. Yeah, we need to get that. Just working out the rules. Okay, we've worked out the rules. Now all these leftists go the fuck away, just like that. And they're like, "What? Wait, I thought we had."
Yeah, it was a
cancel culture gone wild. Cancel culture gone mad. But that's
one. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think leftists should never support this kind of infringement of free speech ever, even if it feels right, and even if some people deserve it, it will be used against you. I do believe that. Yes,
I agree with
that.
I think
I completely agree. I think one of the things that I think both liberals and the left completely misunderstand by the conservative movements, and we had McManus on talking about this postmodern conservatism, and I think what's important to understand is this new iteration of conservatism has no principles in the sense that their entire political agenda is based on the maintenance and continuation of privilege and power. And you see this with, for example, I don't know if Kuba read it, but Anne Applebaum had a new book had a biography about how all these people who were for democracy during the Cold War suddenly became anti-democratic, and she can't understand why. It's because these guys never cared about democracy. Democracy was only a vehicle to maintain their power and privilege. As soon as democratic discourse became unhelpful to their political objectives, they discarded it. Just as reverence for political institutions in the United States, the conservatives will play that up until it's not useful for them, and then they don't care about the institutions in the United States. Just as conservatives will make a big song and dance about free speech until free speech is not beneficial to their position. And liberals are uniquely unqualified to combat this type of ideology because they are credulous. Right? They take the people in good faith without not immediately assuming that these people are acting in bad faith and they don't mean what they are saying. And I think this is what I'm very, you mentioned the algorithm. You have these dummy liberals who are like, well, maybe we should stop all this racist stuff. Maybe we should pass all this kind of things. And then we have to do it in a fair and balanced way, which ends up, hammering the left, hammering certain elements of the right, and then the right has the money to create its own ecosystem anyway, so it doesn't even affect them in the first place. So we live, so they basically, liberals are really, when it comes to this kind of discourse, useful idiots for conservatives, because they don't realize that in our there was a time perhaps in earlier eras that conservatives were, let's say, principled right-wing liberals, right? They were liberals in the right-wing economic sense.
Like a Mitt Romney type.
The Mitt Romney types. They're like, we believe in kind of like right-wing bourgeois liberal values. We believe in like free markets, blah, 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 whatever. This new iteration has no fundamental political principles. This is what we see in the Trump movement in the United States. This is what we see with the Conservative Party in Great Britain. There was, it used to be that Labour's plans are terrible in Britain because there's no magic money tree to pay for them. And then suddenly, when it's convenient for them, there's a magic money tree. And what I see in Germany with Alternative for Deutschland, there seems to be this same kind of like postmodern conservatism, where it's an amorphous and protean ideology which allows to coalesce very different groups to a political agenda which boils down to maintaining power and privilege.
So
I think in the United States, I disagree. I think in the United States they do have a principle. I think that principle is white nationalism.
In post-Soviet Russia, there was this kind of cross-pollination of right-wing politics with some elements of Soviet information ops that culminates in like they call it technology, which are techniques and patterns of social manipulation. And it's basically propaganda. You just treat the entire public sphere as a forum for disseminating your propaganda. Nothing of what you say is true. It's just a question of whether it's useful to steer the public in your direction or not, while your actual beliefs remain completely opaque. You don't display them because that's not the point of public speech. And I think that postmodern conservatism has gotten to that point, that whatever they say they mean doesn't actually convey any information whatsoever, because they're making that statement not to tell you what they think, but because they think that it'll have an impact politically and socially that's favorable for them.
I need my German comrades to read this super chat because there's umlauts and.
Can I try it first?
Yes.
Go for it. Mark, yeah, no, shit. I didn't know Marcus spoke.
Kan es das unmissfallen, wie die linkt anhin?
You did. I thought Americans always do the high-pitched voices when they try to imitate Germans. Könnt ihr das Urmissvertrauen versus die Links angeht?
I love German dialect movies. I love it.
It's always
that's actual German.
So what is that? What does that say?
It says, can you talk about the mistrust regarding the left? Are you talking about the party, the left, or the left movement overall?
Yeah, it's a bit difficult to understand that question. And the Urmissvertrauen suggests that it's like Ur means like has been there forever.
Inherited.
So basically, they inherited Missvertrauen. I don't really get that question, but I mean, maybe that answers this question. I think in Germany there is still a special case in this. I do not disagree with Daniel. I do not think they will ever hit 20%, because the center, as of right now in Germany, is still very, very stable. And I don't think this will change in the future. And it's very, very powerful. And you still have a lot of wealthy middle-class people. They're not the majority of people, but you have a lot of wealthy middle-class people that sustain that system this way. And you do not have, to that extent, this kind of resentment in the general population. On the left, on our, like with me and Daniel, you do have it. But in the general population, you do not have this kind of overwhelming resentment towards politics to the same degree that you have it, for example, I would say in the US. Although, I mean, there's another point, which is we have like a third of the people that are actually not voting. They are also not voting for the AfD. Like they're completely out of politics, right? So who knows what happens if some party actually manages to activate those? Maybe it could be a left party, a real left party. I hope it's not a right-wing party. If you look at how the voters went to the AfD, so the AfD got into government in 2017, right? 2021, this year we have another vote. But 4 years ago they got to the government. That was the first time they got into government, I think. They had some federal governments before, some seats before, but in the Bundestag they were in 2017. Most of them, proportionally, if you look at from which parties that the voters go to the AfD, came by far from the CDU, by far, right? So they were not coming from Nazi parties or something like this. They were just disenfranchised or unhappy voters from the CDU that were maybe not as happy with the way that the CDU or Merkel dealt with the refugee situation. And then we had so that was more or less like 1 million people, and then we had like 1.25 million people that actually were activated from the non-voting mass, right? In terms of percentage, that's still below 1% of the population, so that's fairly low. But these are basically the two groups that got the AfD into power. It's CDU people who wanted to turn the CDU more to the right, and non-voters that were activated probably by the resentment. At the same time, I also want to really stress that we should combat this liberal outrage and really not give the AfD that much, that much props and that much credits. We should not say they're fascists. We should not say they're all Nazis, because they aren't. It's not true. And I think there are people in this party still, or people that vote for this party, not in this party, but people that vote for this party still, that we can somehow reach, and we can somehow talk to them and convince them that then voting for this party doesn't make sense, even if you're white. I do think there are probably also many that are just, and I agree with Pascal also, probably many that are just ideologically racist, and they want to have less foreigners in their town, although they don't even have one in their town because they have never seen one in 30 years. They just know about Berlin, what's happening in Berlin. So this also exists, but I really don't think that's the majority, right? And if you see, and we can tie this back to the first discussion that we had about the vaccination. If you see the crisis of what's happening there, and crisis of credibility, and the crisis of media also, how media reports, and how those people are actually being depicted in the media also, you can see that all these things, this resentment against the system, is connected, and it's coming from a common place. And I don't think that the one epistemological factor is the racism, white racism of the people here. I do not believe that.
You don't think that that's the? I mean, I think that the overarching driving function is that racism works in facilitating capitalism. Bottom line.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. But what I'm saying is, I don't think that racist ideas or racist ideology is what led to movements like the AfD, or like Pegida, or like the Querdenker, the anti-vax movement that we have, right? I think it probably has a factor, and it probably plays into this, and there is a reason why it fits together very well. But there are underlying mechanisms there, and this is basically the crisis of the system that Daniel was talking about, that we should actually address. Yes. And then I think we'll also get to the root of problems like racism. So why?
I have a question.
Right. So that's my point.
I have a question. If
sure, sir.
In Obama's second term, 95% of his job growth were quality wage, good working class jobs. He had a 4% GDP growth for the last 3 quarters of his second term. And the economy increased at a relatively stable clip. Would Trump have been president in 2016?
Probably not.
Of course not.
So what does that mean? Does that not mean that the driving force behind Trump's victory had to do with the failure of Obama's economic policies to deal with a disaffected, largely white voter constituency who expected changes in the hope, yes, we can president, but instead got a 95% gig economy job creating president, opioid crisis, deindustrialization on fleek. Is it an accident that when Trump beats Hillary, where does he win? The Rust Belt states? Why? What is the Clinton policy relative to the Rust Belt states? NAFTA?
Who would disagree with that? Who on the panel would disagree with that, though? I think
no one on the panel, but there's a lot of people in the black shattering class who were like, "It's the racism that Trump."
I would even go further than that, Pascal. I would go further than that, Pascal. So you said, like, when I said that postmodern conservatism has no ideological principles, you mentioned the issue of racism. I don't even think the racism deployed by postmodern conservatism is principled racism, because I believe one of the iterations of this postmodern conservative movement that it makes it so slippery is its ability to, yes, when it is politically convenient to do these subtle nods to white identity politics, which are baked into the American capitalist system, because that's how American capitalism is structured. But I would think that these postmodern conservatism in the United States in particular, but also in Europe, in the Conservative Party, they will be more than willing to bring Black people or people of color to high positions. I believe even some high positions in a way that racist political parties who were driven, not primarily, but had a stronger ideological content to their racism would not. I believe the United States would elect Candace Owens. No problem.
Gene, what you're saying is just true.
I mean, Nixon had quite a few Black people in his.
Look at the Tories. Look at the Tories in England.
I think one of Trump's greatest political aspirations was to be able to say, "I got 20% of the Black vote."
Yep.
Yeah, I think postmodern conservatism, one of the characteristics is this protean character, and they can create and destroy groups as it was, like ADOS, right? So you don't have to like all Black people, but suddenly you've got this ADOS group that is carved out of the Black community, and they become the good Black people. And then you have like Cubans who are the good Latin American people. I think this is what
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I think what Trumpism presents, and we saw that in the results from the 2020 election, is a capacity for a multiracial fascism. I think it's possible.
I mean, isn't that the Proud Boys?
Yeah.
Torreo, whatever. That, he was the leader. I think. He might be in prison. He might be on his way. He was a Cuban guy, wasn't he? He was also an informant, which is interesting. But let
me tell you something.
That's what I was making the point earlier. When the distinction of what actually makes the fucking difference between capitalism or racism, or what's the more powerful thing, at the end of the day, Ben Carson was appointed by Trump.
Let me tell you something right
now. He did it. What you're describing is not
Trump. Trump was smart in 2020. If he ran on all his normal reactionary nonsense, make America great, and he said, "We want our ADOS people to get reparations. We're going to sit down with their leadership and come up with a reparations package because they deserve it. These other immigrants, including the other Black ones, are taking their share of the pie." They'd get that vote. They get a large part of the Black vote. If they said, "Yes, we definitely know the problems with immigration is affecting us adversely in this country, and we want to make sure that our ADOS people are protected from that," they would get that vote.
And what's real sick is that Trump could say that on Maine, and not one of the racist white people would hear him say that and think he's actually going to do that.
Yeah,
the white people the racist white people in Trump's camp would hear Trump say, "Hey, we're going to make sure ADOS gets theirs." They'd be like, "Oh, he's just saying that because he has to." It's the master plan, and it would just. Yeah, I'm just saying I agree, and that's how it would work.
But you can give them something and be like, "I'm done." Pascal says this all the time, and at first
white racists kind of like buying Black people.
Whether they're liberals or conservatives.
Pascal says this all. He would say this all the time, and I didn't want to believe him at first. And he said, and now I'm like, I'm all the way in, bought in. He goes, Joe Biden is going to give Negroes something and call it reparations. And we're seeing the test ground in places like Evansville, Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, you're going to get reparations. You just have to fill out this fucking 100-sheet form to prove that you were discriminated against. Have fun with that. And it's really reparations is kind of a lone-ish thing.
I'm gonna go against that. I'm gonna say it's not gonna be Joe Biden who gives reparations. Joe Biden might try and do that, but it will crash in the Congress. What's gonna happen is that President Candace Owens is going to be reparations. And President Candace Owens is because it's like Nixon to China. It's like Nixon to China. It's like Ariel Sharon was the only one who could pull out the Israelis from Gaza. Nixon was the only one who could send someone to China because liberals are terrified completely terrified of being seen to, like, you know, be giving too much to people, whether it's working class people, whether it's African American people. But the right has no principles. So President Candace Owens, when she's elected in 2024, will come up and say, we're going to do a black business loan thing. It's going to be reparations, and the entire political right will rally behind it and say, this is the best thing that was ever done. Because racism is a Democrat.
Candace Owens is not going to be president of the United States. Tim Scott might run, or someone like him, or Larry Elder, or somebody like him.
Black.
But if I do believe that I think that the Republicans are waiting for their Obama moment. What I'm saying is that they're manufactured in a petri dish, curated black Republican that gets everyone to say, "Ooh, wow, hey." Let's make this clear: if Colin Powell had wanted to be president, he could have been the first black president. That's a fact.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fact.
He did.
As a matter of fact, I wrote a piece. When Obama ran, because I was skeptical of his ability to run, and I said, "Too bad he's in the wrong party, because if this guy was a Republican, he'd be president." And even though he did run, he basically ran a Republican agenda. My point is that the Republicans would easily be able to create an Obama-like, charismatic figure who had, neoliberal to repressive politics, who talked that racial uplift stuff, who might even offer some type of reparations, couched with a serious anti-immigrant rhetoric. And I think it would work for them. All he had to do is, all a Republican has to do is say two things: reparations and student loan forgiveness. And he's good. That gets you about 30% of the white left, and that gets you about 25-30% of black voters. You're in the house.
I don't know that student loan that will ever come out of their mouth, but I think some of that Biden will do.
It doesn't have to be full forgiveness. Just some.
No. I think Biden will. There's something not enough, and it's also too late, especially when it comes to like gerrymandering the districts and everything like that. Since the census data's already come out, but like I don't have to go too deep into that. The only thing that's gonna like some type of voting rights legislation will come out. At the end of the day, it's too late and not enough. But that's gonna be his black. That's gonna be Biden's black agenda, and like that's what I think it's gonna be, at least.
No, he's going to do something. Listen, Biden is going to do something. He's going to have a black agenda-esque policy. He might couch it as reparations, and he's going. And you know what Biden is going to say? Because Biden is crass enough to say that. I gave you people more than any president you've got since Nixon. Prove me wrong.
I mean, I don't disagree with that sentence, other than it's going to be something to do with a watered-down fucking voting bill.
No, it's going to be black capitalism with some. I mean,
I'm just saying, like they're wasting. Then like they need to get something out there. They need to put something out there. Like,
bro, it's early, man. We got another 3 years. It's early in the administration. It's going to be black capitalism with some means-tested programs for the lower echelon folk. It's going to have some housing programs, housing allotments, and it's going to be pitched, and people will be like, "Well," and he'll be like, "No one else did this for you," and people will say, "Okay."
I do want to bring up this question because it's starting to get late. Janice Graham, and I don't know if you guys want to answer a financial question. She says, "Can we talk the politics of Deutsche Bank?"
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yeah, I was going to say you guys aren't economists. Does Deutsche Bank is it big news where you guys are? Or are they really quiet out there?
Depends whether they just have a corruption scandal up their ass or not.
Yeah, I mean, they do have. I mean, to be honest, yeah, I would have had to study up on this a little bit, but yeah, they do have quite a few scandals in recent years.
They have
one going on right now, don't they?
For all intents and purposes, this bank should be totally like underwater right now, man. They've had like major problems with their spreadsheets, with their bottom line numbers. There are all kinds of financial improprieties. Like, I mean, I would argue that one of the reasons that Deutsche Bank gets away with this is that there's allegations that they're like funneling money into right-wing forces, globally. There's all types of, accusations that they're behind dark money campaigns. A lot of shady stuff.
Are you allowed to answer this question?
Who? Cuba?
Us?
Cuba?
Who?
No.
Cuba.
Cuba, are you allowed to weigh in on this?
To chime in on this? So I don't think of Deutsche Bank as being a particularly bad offender in terms of globalized financial capitalism. But anybody that big is doing, half of their business model is going to be some kind of crime. HSBC laundered money for Mexican cartels. I think Deutsche Bank was involved in some kind of Iranian sanctions busting. There's also a significant portion of European finance that's just dedicated to tax evasion. And I think Deutsche Bank,
Russian money laundering, big time.
Russian money laundering.
It is the most important German bank. It has like all those scandals that you know of, which are these, financial, we say Steueroasen, like tax havens. Yeah, tax haven, I think is the word. And connections to, otherwise sanctioned countries or right-wing groups, etc. And these scandals, they cause tremor in the public sphere, of course. But yeah, I would also not. I mean, one thing that is particularly interesting is I think that they, from all the banks, I think even worldwide, this is something I heard. I cannot 100% confirm this, but I think worldwide, Deutsche Bank is the bank that got the most bailout money ever by any other standard, right? I think it's around 400 billion or something, or 300 billion.
Part of that has to do with the fact that it operates substantially in
it's too big to fail. Market. It's our Goldman Sachs. Yeah, it's too big to fail. It cannot fail.
Deutsche Bank is Germany's Goldman Sachs, but it's also America's Morgan, one of the lower Morgans. It's a substantial bank on Wall Street, and it's a substantial bank in many international markets. So it gets bailout money from the EU, it gets bailout money from the UK government, it gets bailout money from the US government.
I think they were the bank that had the most driving force behind the Greek crisis, because they had the most loans with the Greek state. I think they were one of the driving forces.
I don't think it was the Greek state. I think that the way that Greece operated is that Greek banks loaned money to the Greek state. German banks loaned money to the Greek banks. And then this was a terrible decision made early on in the European side of the financial crisis, and not just by Greece, but by Ireland as well, where the banks had the bad loans, but the more important banks had loans to those banks. So every government was under pressure to nationalize that bad debt that actually belonged to private financial institutions. And if you just let them go bankrupt, then you wouldn't have the austerity, you wouldn't have had to have all this austerity imposed on you. But the pressure from EU governments, from the debtor countries, Germany, France, and the UK especially, was irresistible. So you end up nationalizing a whole bunch of bad debt that was taken out by private actors that knew what they were doing was irresponsible and criminal. And the banks that made the loans also knew that
it was
this was bad money, but they were counting on.
I mean,
I still think. So, especially with the Greek crisis, it also was clear that they actually made more money out of that by pummeling them afterwards. And also that's the thing, and also the short leash that they could put on Greece was also extremely beneficial. So I think it was a like rigged game from the get-go. They all knew where this was going, and it is also interesting that none of the Greek elite lost money in that.
Yeah, and not even like. No, you go ahead, Gene.
Also, I was going to say it's the like the European Union is like it's a bloc, but of course there's a division of labor within that bloc, and Britain especially, but also France and Germany, they have like large financial institutions that drive government policy. Like all that are integrated with the political elite, and of course they had interests in making sure that Greece did not collapse under the weight of the debt, or they didn't leave the EU. They used that financial power. So the banks are extremely influential. I don't know about the German case, but in the British case, the big banks and the financial sector is extremely influential on, especially on the Conservative Party, but also under Tony Blair's Labour Party. They have a huge role in driving policy. If banks did not have that role, European countries might have taken a different attitude towards the Greek crisis, but banks were critical in driving that very harsh policy agenda, because they're big donors to political parties. They are retirement places for ex-politicians. They're completely integrated.
And they've also convinced government leaders and many academic economists, specialists at NGOs and international organizations that the private financial system, comprised of all of these peak institutions, these giant banks that slosh money around, is on the one hand essential to the real economy in a fundamental way, like bones to a human body, but also it is a private industry that needs to have the dynamism of capitalism and the profit motive. So no regulation, please, but we need to be bailed out if we're ever in trouble, or we're taking everything down with us.
Neoliberalism, baby.
Yeah, super chat. Thoughts on veganism? I think Marxists should support ending the industrialized and grotesque exploitation of animals for profit on principle. I'm not a vegan. I think that the stronger argument for veganism is the contribution that beef and meat makes to gases like global CO2 and emissions.
I actually have some thoughts on this. I'm very sympathetic to the critique of the way that the meat industry operates and the cruelty to animals and the suffering that takes place. I'm not in principle against eating meat. There are plenty of societies that have worked out ways to hunt meat sustainably. We perhaps, of course, eat too much meat. But in terms of the environmental damage and the cruelty, it's also important to remember that major agricultural crops, the clearing of land for soy production, the clearing of land for that also has a huge impact on animals as well. So unless we move to more sustainable and environmentally friendly forms of restorative agriculture, whether we're talking about meat production, whether we're talking about big agricultural production of crops like soybeans, like corn, like wheat, we are dealing with systems that are going to be damaging to the environment, damaging to the ecosystem, and cruel to animals. So I think this is a very big question, and I think it's one of those questions that has to be tackled in a post-capitalist system, and a system that has a more humane approach to animal rearing as well as crop agriculture.
And just from my experience in German discussions with, like, as a leftist, trying to convince people to embrace a socialistic or a Marxist perspective, I think that we do need to think tactically on what kind of demands we put on people as individuals, because we need to take care about not alienating people further than we are already alienating them with our discourse here. While I totally agree that I think probably in the future this all will look different, and we probably also should do things about it right now. And I think it's very important that it becomes a structural and a systemic discussion, and not an individual discussion on, are you already a vegan? Why are you still why are you still eating meat? And if you are, don't you feel guilty about that? I think that's completely the wrong way, and it will really hamper us as a movement if we would adopt this.
Full agreement. We have another super chat in German. Dieser Gespräch ist sehr interessant. Nice German. It's dieses Gespräch, to be a grammar Nazi a little bit. Aber
he corrected him.
Well, actually, we don't say grammar Nazi anymore. We say alt-right. Alt-right.
Nice.
We say Nazi.
Okay, that person practically says that this conversation is very interesting. Thank you for that.
Yes, thanks. Thank you.
Oh,
thank you. Appreciate it. I gotta say,
Pascal,
I agree largely with.
I guess on me. Oh, thank you so much. I like mint.
Like physically
Moroccan mint tea is very good. If you haven't tried, Shirley, try some. If you get a chance to try some Moroccan mint tea, it's one of my favorites. It's very good.
Yeah, true.
I gotta agree with largely what was said though, with, like, about like the veganism, and even like the takes of like how the left should incorporate with it. I think I think the major focus too is like more of the corporate farming, because that's where you've got some of the worst additions to the climate crisis, the highest like forms of cruelty to animals. And I think where actual, like Marxism or, leftist critique would come into play, the highest exploitation of workers in the farming industry is in these corporate farms. And so I would say, like if you're vegan and you're really, focused on the exploitation of animals, I think like there's also some of the highest exploited workers, which, that's a good tandem up with the rest of the left, that you can actually, maybe focus on that. And then you're also focusing on the largest amount of the meat production, right? Is if you're going after those farms.
Oh, this is a nice one. Whenever I listen to the radio, I hear an ad that proudly boasts that our city will host the country's only Black-owned casino. I think of y'all and say to myself, the end of racism is nigh.
Well, that's what's going to happen if they do like if they do checks for reparations. They're going to like dish out the checks, and the next thing you know, North St. Louis is going to have the country's first Black-owned casino.
You're going to have to pick up the check at the casino.
Yes, it's like peasant land reform. You have this land reform. You divide up all the land. The black, what do they call it? The black redistribution. I forget. You get the landowner's land. You split it all up, but then within a generation, somebody's bought all the land, and there's a bunch of people who've been forced off their puppy's land. So without structural change. But yeah, I can totally see that.
Well, there's a reason why. There's a reason why black billionaires like Robert Smith and as well as Bob Johnson can't wait for reparations, because it's going to be a wealth transfer to the black political class and the black elite. That's exactly what's going to be, because it's racial. That's what racial democracy and race first programs give you, is a wealth transfer.
They will put a booze shop. They will put a lottery shop. They will put all kinds of shops in black neighborhoods when they realize, like, if they think that there's going to be everybody in the city is going to get $10,000. That's just what's going to be happening. There's going to be.
That's going to be more.
I know that famously having native-owned casinos has, like, there's no issues within the United States with tribes. Right anymore?
No, Native Americans got their reparations, and they're doing real well.
Yeah, everything's perfect. I've never heard one thing, because like they got their own casinos. Bam. And I'll tell you this: Spike Lee though didn't start his own cryptocurrency because it's the way to black liberation. All right, let's just get this out there. He didn't start that shit because like it's actually going to solve anything.
Well, it comes down to the kind of the race relations industrial complex, right? There's a whole lot of money to be made by endlessly navel gazing about race relations.
Yeah. Over 70% of black businesses are started. Over 80% are started by black people who have at least 3 years of college. All right, or more. So black capitalism is going to work, for people who have my kind of academic pedigree, which is less than 25% of black people.
Hot hand of the dice game, baby.
Thank you very much, Jeremy Logan. We appreciate that more than you know. And I thought this comment was funny. If you remember the Dave Chappelle show, I don't know if our Drummer brothers actually got the Chappelle show, but there was a skit where there was reparations paid out, and a character Chappelle played became the richest man in the world after winning a dice game. That was one. That's where you get the "I'm rich, bitch" joke from, is that Chappelle show reparations payout because the guy, the Ashy Larry character, bought a big shipping container's worth of cigarettes, and he's driving down the street in a cool truck of menthol cigarettes, and he's yelling out, I'm rich, bitch."
I'm not a truck driver. I'm not a truck driver. I just bought this truck cash. What's one of my favorite fucking episodes?
You know what we need to do? We need to cash in on all this. We need to create This Is Revolution Bitcoin. That's what we need.
Oh no.
This is Revolution Bitcoin. Yeah, that's how we do.
Revolution.
Yeah.
Dude,
imagine how much Bitcoin is going to get
for
born.
value recognized after the revolution.
Yes.
Right.
You could only avoid the Mau if you pay in
Revolution
Bitcoin.
coin. We redistribute the land, we redistribute capital, but TIR Bitcoin, I'm sorry, that's sacred.
TIR Bitcoin. That's where
I will be. You know what? You don't have to worry about saying happy birthday. I will be here for my birthday. Milton Alamani, the birthday show. So I'm excited for my birthday week.
Oh, nice.
We will have Tuesday show is going to be a show that I actually tried to get last year because I'm a big fan of this woman's books. It is Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, and we'll be talking about her upcoming book, Not a Nation of Immigrants.
This is funny. Fatback and Bitcoin.
So I got a message from our German brothers, and they were like, hey, we're doing this compilation. Can you throw us a track? And I was like, sure, I have no problem throwing you a track. Can you do one that's already released? And they were like, yeah, sure. So I don't know who Valerie June is, but I do want.
Who else do we have next week?
Actually, it was the compilation is not from Germany. The compilation is from Athens. It's about fire relief for the wildfires that they had. So it's a Greek compilation.
Well, the song is going to be in English.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
This is the song you're going to get.
Nice.
Ooh.
This is a live version. So yeah, that song.
Nice. Nice Janice Graham is horrified right now. She's like, "That's not Jason. That's my Jason. What?
That's my baby Jason. This music is dangerous. Don't let Kuba listen to it too much. He might.
Gore taught us that this music doesn't fly. You know, like this is evil.
Yeah, I mean, Eastern Europeans listening to heavy music can turn ugly very quickly.
It can turn into an anti-Turkish.
That's how you got the Yabik party.
Very fast. Yeah.
So I'm gonna send you guys that one in the
Much
in
appreciated.
that email.
I usually don't like heavy music, but I like Jason singing heavy music.
That's good.
That's a lot of fun. And so
yeah, me too. Me too. Same over here.
So on my birthday, next Thursday, I recorded it when the lockdown first happened. I was stuck inside the studio I was living in at the time. And so I recorded a whole EP just stuck inside. So I'm finally releasing that EP. There's been artwork for it for like a year. We've had it mixed for a year. I've just been sitting on it because I'm like, I don't give a shit. So I'm just going to release it, of course, for free because I don't really care. One of those pay what you want things. Nice. But yeah, so I'm doing that. Other than that,
well, tell them about the merch, guys. Tell them about the
merch. Shit. Be entertaining, everybody, while I go pull it up.
We've got merch. We've got
merch. And also on Patreon, when we get to 1,000 Patreons, we're gonna do a live show where you can meet Pascal, and you can get a selfie with Pascal. He may even sing for you. So
he will definitely, if you bring Fatback and biscuits, he will sing. He'll do a signature on your Fatback and biscuits.
I will sign on. I will not eat them. I don't eat the pork.
And if you're
but you eat the biscuit, though.
Then you can nominate somebody for the Mau Mau.
Yes, we will be having a Mau Mau show sometime at the end of this month. I'll decide who the victim of the Mau Mau will be, or victims.
You mean the award winners? Not victims.
Think big.
Like we're on air. They're award winners.
The award winners of the Mau Mau.
I do this thing all the time where I was talking. Assuming everything's well with COVID, we're definitely gonna do the show. I actually have some people that I know that are not doing well trying to tour during COVID. So the band and I have been like terrified to do anything live. The other black guy in my band has been playing like social distance shows with his father, who is a very well-known blues musician.
So we got to get to 1,000 so we can do that. And also remember to subscribe to Nadim's and Daniel's show. Remember to subscribe to This Is Revolution podcast. Become a patron if that is a possibility. If you can't become a patron, that we totally understand. But we do need to get, we're trying to grow the show. And of course, you can check out my fantastic This Is Revolution hat. You can get all the This Is Revolution merchandise. And what else do we need to tell people? Like and subscribe those videos.
Like and subscribe. Please subscribe to our German brothers. They're almost at 1,000. It would be amazing.
What's the name of the show? Who's asking? What's the name of Nadim and Daniel's show?
It's 99 zu Eins.
It is. Yes, and it means 99 to 1.
It is in the title of the show, and there's a link in the description of the show to their YouTube channel. I tried to make it that easy. There's also
why don't you just call it 99 von Luftballon?
Oh, it's.
I actually never made that connection before I joined this podcast today. But yeah, we should make that our theme song or something.
So someone said, "What about concert?" So that little live thing you saw right there, we had to do really early in the morning, and we hated doing it. But we liked the guys we were doing it with. Me personally, I hate performing in front of that kind of camera. That's why I hate videos. I'd rather do shit live with people. It's just way more fun. There's more energy. My band is so used to me being crazy, even in the practice space, that they don't care. So I like the energy from crowds opposed to doing something on Twitch. So we kind of are not going to go that route as of yet. But other than that, thank you guys for spending some time with us today. I know it's a little later where you are.
That's okay.
Uba, Pascal,
all good. No, that's fine.
Gene, Marcus, thank you guys for spending the afternoon with me, or Kuba spending the morning with me. Thank you guys for everybody in the chat that contributed to super chats and having this cross show where we were getting stuff in German, and that was kind of crazy.
It was good. It was really
I like
good.
it.
I do.
Yeah, you should check that out. Definitely.
Kuba, the place that we're gonna meet for brunch in Raytheon Acres, do I need to bring a jacket for that? Is it like kind of like business
you might want to bring somebody with like a tie and a lanyard.
Oh yeah. Well, so
okay. Goes without saying, right? Like,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Just make sure, you know, with the picture side facing you, so they'll have to either ask or let you walk through. That's a power move.
Yeah.
Power.
Every time I hear the term lanyard, I always think like the lanyards sound like a social class in revolutionary France that got murdered.
What you say is like
the massacre of the lanyards.
Yeah. They were Calvinists, so they had it coming.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys. And since it's my show, I'm going to play more of my music. There you go.
99 balloons.
I mean, I would like to see Jason do a cover.
Yeah, that's what needs to happen.
I love how your guitar player uses a Telecaster. You don't see a lot of Telecasters in metal.
We hella use Telecasters for metal. And this is tuned to drop F sharp. Taco meat.
I don't understand what you're saying.
It's about rap food.
You're saying.
We're not quite done yet. We are Bitter Lake from West Oakland, California. And before we go, we're gonna show you how we say goodbye from the town. The town we live in. We live across the street from one of the largest homeless encampments in the city of Oakland. I wake up in the morning and see these people go to work, just like us. We forget the word solidarity from time to time. We're gonna remind you of it real quick. We die, survive, just like rats, they die. We die, survive, just like rats, they die. We die, survive, just like rats, they die. We die, survive.